And so really today, I want to talk about what the difference is between men and women and our sex drive and our libidos.
Yes. Well, I think, where you started right there, like the word drive, I think this is how we've all been taught, right? Sex drive puts a lot of pressure, a whole lot of pressure on the whole situation because it's not really a drive like hunger or thirst. Like you're not going to die. But because we put that word sex drive on everything, it makes people feel like, no, but this is something I have to be doing. And that pressure alone, that puts a lot of women out of the mood. So just the pressure of like, I have to keep up with my partner or he wants it, therefore, I have to be turned on. I have to be doing more. That kind of pressure, I always, around Valentine's Day, bring up this conversation because just the idea of Valentine's Day and that you're supposed to have sex on that day or, be intimate in any way, that puts a lot of people out of the mood. And that's a very common feeling.
Also on your wedding night, that's the other thing.
Wedding nights, anniversaries, anytime there feels like it becomes a sex-pectation, that's when people are like, yeah, and it's not just women, but it can be men too, but we see a lot of women who are like, now that I feel this pressure, I have anxiety about it, I'm no longer in the mood because I have this stress. For men, it can also be a situation where they have this pressure, they're feeling like they have to perform, right? Because we talk a lot about how women, their libido and all these things, but what gets left out of the conversation is that society puts a lot of pressure on men. You're supposed to perform, you're supposed to be a stallion in the bedroom, you're supposed to be able to go forever. By the way, the research shows us that women actually don't want you to go forever. That's not
really a surprise.
I know, what a surprise. And that's where things get tricky, right? Because you're talking about Cosmo, Sex in the City. I mean, I talk about Sex in the City in the book because of course, so many of us were like, Samantha, teach us, please. We did not get this information. But when you look at Cosmo is much like our sex education. It's always very male-centered. How to please your man is the headline. How to give a better blowjob. How it's always about them. And it's that kind of messaging there that also puts a lot of pressure on women to feel like, oh, I have to be, not thinking about my pleasure, not thinking about what I like. And some of the tips that they give, are not even they're not even what men want or what your partner might want. Sometimes you'll see things where it's like, oh, suck as hard as you can on the tip. And not necessarily, someone might not be into that. And I think, things like, oh, make sure that you're nibbling his ear. Things, even little benign things like that, in comparison, it's well, maybe that does it for them, but maybe it doesn't. And I think that's the big piece that we're missing is not talking about what do you like? Do you like this? That can be part of the consent conversation. Consent can be sexy and also intel, so that you're not just, wandering around in the dark of what do you want from me?
I love this so much. The sex-pectation thing is so fire because when you were saying it, I was like, oh my God, we've not only been doing women a disservice, but also the men a disservice. Oh, yeah. So talk to me about that. And then, in your book, which is amazing, there's so much information. I really want to go deep into all the stats and the data because it's fascinating to me. Because the first thing was 40% of women have low libido.
That they'll report that they believe they have low libido. Yeah, so low libido and inability to orgasm are some of the top sexual complaints that women have. When you get into the research and really understanding what is libido all about, most women don't have a low libido. So I actually say in the book, I'll ask patients, how does it, you're sitting here comparing, do you compare your menstrual cycle to your friends and your neighbors, your sleep habits and all of that and get all worked up of I must not be normal because it's not just like them. Why would you have these variations? Your sexual desire will also have variations as well. And so with sexual desire, everything is, again, from the male perspective. I mean, even medicine has for a very long time been the male body is this is the archetype. This is the standard, which we compare everything to. And then there's this inferior model called the female body, and it comes with baby making accessories. That is very much, I mean, even in
horrifying.
I mean, so much of art and, history and medicine, we have seen that's been the narrative that plays through. And so when it comes to sexual desire, it's very confusing. I feel it's kind of like watching a tennis match in some ways where it's oh, you're supposed to be into him, but not too into him because otherwise what does that say about you? And oh, but you want to be, you want to be into it enough, but oh, not too much because then you're too much like a man, but you should be more like a man and match him. And you're what am I supposed to be? I don't even understand. So in reality, when we talk about sexual desire in women and why do women engage in sex, what we know from the research is that while men may be more inclined to be like sex, orgasm, yes, done, that's what it's about. Women will engage in sex not just for the orgasm. Orgasms are great, lots of good reasons to have them. Everybody enjoys them, like wonderful. However, women also will enter into sex because they want to bond. They want to feel intimate with their partner. They want to feel close. Some women, when they're feeling stressed, it's a way to have that safety and to feel connected to someone. And so there's a lot of reasons why we'll enter into sex. And there's a lot of things that can inhibit us from even receiving the signals of sex. So we can talk about, there's this spontaneous and responsive desire. And that's where it gets like male, female, we think of a lot. And then there's like the things that really hit the brakes and hit the gas pedal, which is the sexual excitation and inhibition model. So spontaneous desire is like sex on the brain, like all the time. So you're like walking around and your brain is constantly serving, just like, is this sex? Is that sex? Like, what's sex? And it's primed for that. And that's what we think of like the male archetypes. But not all men are like that, and that is normal. Now, on the flip side, there's the responsive desire. And that's where I'm like, I say, like, you got to get going for things to get going. Like, your brain isn't necessarily like, oh, sex, sex, sex. It's like, oh, this is nice. Not sure. Okay, things are going. Oh, no, this is really not. Okay, I'm in. Like, let's do this. And so that is the low libido that most people are describing, saying, oh, I have a low libido. When it really is that you have to have stimuli, like it's going to take stimuli for your brain to start registering sex, for you to start getting into the mood. Whereas the spontaneous person, which is like, people will say like, oh, my partner, when I talk about this, they're more spontaneous and I'm more responsive. And like, that's a problem. We're mismatched. And I'm like, imagine if you were both spontaneous. How would you leave the house? Like, that's the new relationship you're talking about, right? Like when you're in a new relationship and you're just like,
right.
I'm just thinking about them all the time. Like, yeah, so it's not abnormal to be mismatched with your partner. And it just takes a matter of communicating of like, I'm not going to probably be the person who initiates unless I like set a reminder on my phone to be like, oh, okay, let's initiate. Let's, let my partner likes this. So that's that spontaneous and responsive desire. So I talk about that. There's a whole libido chapter and we've got quizzes and everything to help you understand where you're at. And that's where I take you into understanding, do you have sensitive gas pedals or sensitive brakes? Like where are you at on that? So the sexual excitation model, this came from some brilliant researchers who were like, hey, it's not just as simple as a light switch. Go figure, right? Turn them on, turn them off. It doesn't work that way. So we can have these variations of like, I'm someone who has like it's very easy to like get me accelerated. And there's very few things that inhibit me. So very few breaks for me. And so you're going to be someone who maybe, likes to have sex in a car, doesn't mind if somebody's going to walk in on you, or maybe that's even exciting for you. So, and then there might be on the flip side, the person who has much more touchy breaks. And they're like, the thought of my child walking into the room literally has me out of the mood. I can't even think about getting there. That's normal. But we have to know, and these are the things that we think of like turn-ons and turn-offs. But whenever we have this conversation, it's usually around things like, did you get them roses? Did you get them chocolates, scented candles, lingerie? And that stuff, it is important for keeping things spicy and interesting and valuing someone. And there's a whole, complex, thing going on over there. But if you have all these breaks engaged, so we were talking about the picking up your clothes and helping out with chores and all of that, those can be the breaks. So if we think about a neuronal pathway, so the nervous system, because that's like the main sexual organ, by the way, everybody's like genitals, and I'm like, but nerves, okay, it's about the nerves.
I love that you said that.
Yeah. So if you think about it as like you can think of it like a train track. And if you have so we're talking about a heterosexual relationship. She asked you like, okay, can you stop by the store and pick this up for me? You don't do it. Okay, that was a break because that just added a stressor. So we just put a block on the train tracks. You're at home. She needs help with the kids. She asks you to do something. You're like, oh yeah, like give me a minute, and you're not helping in some way. That's another break. She tells you like, I have this really hard day. I need to talk through this. Oh, I don't have time. The game's on right now. We just hit another break. She goes into the room. She sees that you didn't put any of your clothes in the laundry hamper. That's definitely a trigger for her. Now she has to clean up after you. It's put another burden on her. get another break. So the game's over. You come over to her. You're like, oh, you be looking so good. Let me start kissing up on you. I know you like these things. You're sending sexy signals. You're like trying to send the train that you have all of these blocks. It'll never get through. And the brain is like, I can't even hear that. I cannot even hear that right now. Like under a normal circumstances of like all those blocks are removed, that would be like straight line to like sexy time. But because you put all of those blocks in place by not task sharing, inattentiveness, the things that women need. This is like the stuff that's like everything we need to be in the mood is outside of the bedroom. You can't get the sex you want. You can't get to the pleasure you want because of those blockades.
Oh my God, I love that so much. That was so good. And the analogy of the train is so beautiful because here's the thing. I think so much of us feel shame.
Oh, yes.
So let's talk about that, because thinking through what really gets in the way of couples really just embracing each other, having a beautiful relationship, it really does become these slight differences that at the beginning maybe you don't see, maybe you don't realize, maybe you don't know, and then maybe it gets you don't address it, and then it can get worse. And then especially when it comes to women, and then the shame of their body, the shame of not being able to orgasm. Is there something wrong with me? Right? You wrote the whole book, Is This Normal? Very much based on that idea of how much we think it's about us and how we think it's abnormal. And then because of that, we then have the shame. And then the shame becomes the thing that ends up being the biggest sex killer.
Absolutely. No, shame is like, I'd be pressed to find anyone who hasn't been taught to be ashamed of their body in some way, even if they had the most sex positive, period positive parents who embrace them in their home. They're still walking around in a society that's telling them like, oh, periods are yucky, and your body, you have discharge. Oh, that's gross. I mean, even if you remember when Cardi B's WAP came out and their commentary on it of men, I think it was Ben Shapiro who was like, WAP, that's a medical condition. You should really get it checked out. And I'm like, WAP is not a medical condition. Like, that is not, I even wrote about that in the book where I'm like, because I had so many people writing me saying, and I was like, where is this coming from that people think that because they can self-lubricate and that they have copious amounts of self-lubrication, like not a problem, but they thought it was a problem. They thought that something was wrong with them. It's even little things like that that can send women into a spiral in their mind thinking, oh my gosh, like, am I too wet? When has a man ever complained about someone being too wet? And if they do, like, just kick them. You don't need them. Like, they're out, boot them. But you're so right about the shame piece. And body image issues can not only put you out of the mood, but it can stop your arousal. So you can be aroused, you can be into it, and then you can fall into the spectatoring, which is where you basically are on the sidelines watching yourself in the act, being like, oh God, do they notice my rolls in this position? Oh God, is my cellulite showing? Like, oh, I wonder if this light is showing my stretch marks. Like all the things that we've told we should be insecure about, which are totally normal to have on normal bodies. And you get in your mind. You cannot have an orgasm unless you're present, and you will find that like, okay, things now start to get dry. I'm like not as much into this. Now you're like, something's wrong with me. Why can't I have enough lubrication? Why am I not orgasming yet? And so it can really become this spiral. And I think for women to understand that men's brains are flooded with so many feel-good hormones during sex, they cannot pay attention to how your rolls look or how your cellulite, like they can't. They don't have the capacity for it. And if anybody is doing that, you have to ask the question, do they really deserve to be having sex with you? Like, do they?
I love that so much. This is so fascinating. Okay, so let's keep going down the orgasm part. Because if we really believe, okay, orgasm is amazing for a relationship. In fact, let's start there. What's the benefits of orgasms?
Oh, what are not the benefits of orgasms, right? So orgasms are great for decreasing stress. They release hormones that have anti-aging capacity. So the secret to living longer is good sex and lots of pleasure. I mean, pleasure is so important to our health that the World Health Organization says like pleasure should be part of these health conversations. It's something that gets overlooked a lot that, because that myth of like women don't enjoy sex as much as men. Women, they can't orgasm. I mean, but clearly like men want to help us get there because it's one of the top searched. If you go into Google, how to make a woman come is like one of the top search terms. So it's clearly something that is on the top of people's minds. So, the inability to orgasm can be related to all kinds of issues. So like the fear of pregnancy being one. If you don't want to be pregnant, especially in our current political state in this country, that'll definitely put you out of the mood and can make it so that you're not able to become aroused or even have an orgasm. Anything that distracts your mind. So if you are someone who's neurodivergent, you can get distracted.
Neurodivergent.
So if you have like ADHD or autism, you're on in either of those camps. It is so sex can become very redundant and repetitive. So if we talk about having vaginal penetration, it's like the moves, your partner's moves, how everything's going to happen, and the brain can be like, this again, this is so boring. This is like commuting, we don't even know how we got to work, when we're commuting, because we just leave our mind and leave our body. People can get really distracted. So that's something else. If you're not present, you're not mindful. That's why in the book I'm like, you might have to spice it up. Maybe you need to try to play with your senses. You need to bring in feathers, or you need to bring in different textures like lace, or temperatures like ice or something that is warming. Be careful down there with anything that's warming, but you might need different things because your mind is getting distracted. And that is a normal experience. I think people don't want to talk about that, about how sometimes I get bored during sex, sometimes I get distracted. That happens, and that's where we need to communicate. But then we go back to the shame piece, and it's well, do we talk about this? We all do this, but do we actually talk about it? And so, to talk about the benefits of orgasms for women, they're so important for keeping the health of the vulva and the vagina, the pelvic floor. The clitoris is a use it or lose it organ. You can have clitoral atrophy, so we do want to be stimulating it, and that's why we have guides in the book for toys. Because if you don't have a partner, you can have a solo session and make sure you keep up the health of your vulva. And then, there's been some research showing that it can help with immune system function. So having orgasms, having a good session, that can help with your immune system so that your immune system is just better equipped to do its job. It can also help with optimizing your hormones around your menstrual cycle. And in the case of period sex, it may even shorten the period a bit so that your period's not as long. It can relieve period cramps. So lots and lots of benefits.
Oh my God. Okay. So now that you've listed that was amazing. Why the hell do 80% of women fake it?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, the top reason is it's an altruistic behavior. It's an altruistic deceit where they deceive their partner because they want their partner to feel good, right? Because the narrative in society is that the man is he can please any woman, he can go forever, he can he's supposed to do all of these things and be a performer in the bedroom, right? And pleasing women is definitely something that men are told that they should know how to do. Nobody's teaching them about the clitoris, but they are expected to please a woman, right? And so that's a big reason. It's also a way to opt out. So once things are going, you don't want to. You're there's no amount of communication that's going to help me here. This is just bad. And I don't know what to do here, and I don't want to hurt this person's feelings, but I want to get out of this situation. So women will fake orgasms for that reason. Sometimes there's pain, and they just want their partner to stop, and they're okay, this is how I'll get them to stop quicker. And it's not usually a situation because people are oh, women are just trying to trick men. They're usually trying to make that man feel good, satisfy that man, and get their needs met. And so they're trying to find what is the best way to do that. But unfortunately, this is what is part of, what contributes to the orgasm gap, which is the differential between heterosexual men and women having orgasms. 95% of men having orgasms, 65% of women having orgasms. And people will always come in and argue with me and say, well, it's just because it's so difficult to make a woman orgasm. It's near impossible. And I'm but there have been studies showing that if she does it herself, she can get there in 4 minutes. So no, 95% of women can orgasm on their own. And, that's based on studies of self-reporting. So we have to ask the question of how accurate and what's the influence around that. But we also know in lesbian couples, it's over 85% are orgasming. So, okay, there's a big differential there, and it's knowledge of the clitoris.
Is that because women just I know your body because I know mine? Or is it women are more comfortable talking to other women And so if you're in a lesbian relationship, you're just more comfortable in telling them what your pleasure is. And then to your point, that 95% of women masturbate will come. So the fact that only 65% of straight women come, but if you masturbate, it's 95%.
Yeah.
There's a big gap between having sex with someone and then doing it yourself. So going back to the fake it thing, I think it's both. We're maybe not telling our partner, and then also our partner thinks that they're pleasing us.
Yeah. I know.
So
and then you don't get the pleasure you want, which is the crime.
So what do you think about the lesbian then, the 86%? Why do you think that they're able to have more orgasms than in a heterosexual relationship?
Well, I think if you're a vulva owner, finding the clitoris is much easier because you understand, you understand the anatomy. And even if you haven't looked down there, I have had people ask me well, it's crazy how many women haven't looked, so can they not find the clitoris? I'm like, it is not a see organ, it is a feel organ. You don't have to see it to know where it is.
True. Oh my God, that's so true.
Oh, it's very true. I mean, everybody who's watching can leave us a comment and let me know. Is that true? Is that a fact? That it is a feel organ. So with that, I think that's it, just being acquainted with the anatomy, already understanding it. Having masturbated yourself, you're going to understand. So even if you show a man where the clitoris is, I have seen things online. Please, nobody search my browser history in writing this book, because I'd be like, where are people getting this information from? Google it. And it opens up and the website seems legit and it has text. And then I scroll down and I'm like, I did not consent to this. What just happened?
One of the biggest fallacies is that relationships shouldn't be work. Say what? We put time, effort, and hard work into growing our careers or our business, but love should just happen? After 20 years of being married, all starts with being willing to ask and answer hard questions. I have a free downloadable PDF for you for a happy, successful, lasting love. Click the link below for free access to the most important questions you must ask your partner PDF.
So yes, there is information online that's like, oh, women love it if you strum it like a guitar string. Oh, you want to tap it. Things that I'm like, why are men asking men for this advice? And you see all these men on social media being like, men, if you want to please women, this is how. I'm like, you need to sit down, sir. Okay, you are not the expert on the vulva. Let's let a woman stand up. But in reality, you need to ask your partner. So it may very well be that women feel more comfortable having those conversations as well.
Your book is just so full of gold, girl. It was what is it? 2 out of 3 people, millennials, are too embarrassed to even say the word clitoris.
Oh, vagina.
Vagina.
Yeah, vagina. I mean, most sex educators won't say the word vagina. They'll say the penis all day, every day, but they will not say vagina. Even Grey's Anatomy, the TV show, they came up with the word vajayjay because they didn't want to say vagina. They did not want to say it, but they said penis it was over 150 times in an episode, but would not say vagina.
So I think that we're also, I'm always trying to be how did we get here?
Yeah.
I think we also are the contributors to not saying it out loud, not repeating the word as if there should be zero shame around it.
Yeah.
And then I believe you said, is it Freud that basically screwed us all? This dude,
literally
man.
the worst, right?
Literally, yeah. So if you don't mind explaining, I had no idea. And then we're like, oh, this is why I always thought there's something wrong with me, because I thought I should absolutely be able to orgasm through penetration. And I was like, if I can't, then there's definitely something wrong with me.
Yes. Well, and let me ask you, what were you taught in sex ed? What was your sex education like?
I don't even remember having sex ed. The only thing I remember, my Greek grandmother told me a child was brought through a stalk.
Oh, wow.
There was that
accurate.
Old school. Yeah, exactly, very accurate. And then really, it was nothing. No education. And then I remember one day, all of a sudden, my mum showing me how a tampon works by putting it under a tap. And she's like, and this is what happens, and it expands. And I'm like, and what do you want me to do with that?
I know. And where does that go?
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it until I was already having sex. I was in a relationship and I was already having sex before I even looked down there.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about why I also was faking it?
Yeah.
Because I was too ashamed. I was like, you watch the movies, and this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, when they're you watch the movies, that is so true, right? But for a lot of people in sex ed, vagina is taught as babies come out, penises go in. And it is very male-centered. It is very male-centered, and that's how a lot of things get taught. And so we are taught that the vaginal orgasm is like the end all be all, right? That started with Freud. So he said the clitoral orgasm is infantile. And what you should be trying to achieve is a vaginal orgasm. Well, who does that serve? That serves a penis. That doesn't serve women. The penis and the clitoris are the same tissue, but the penis has the job of ejaculating and passing urine. So it has other functions. Clitoris does not have the same job. So therefore, it gets to be very, very sensitive. Its only job is pleasure. Like, that's it. So we've got like 100% pleasure organ. Then we've got pleasure, plus we got to pass things through an organ over here. And we have no problem accepting that, like, oh, you have to stimulate a penis to make a man orgasm. So why wouldn't we accept that you have to stimulate the exact same tissue, the female component, to make a woman orgasm? So it did start with Freud. And I want to say, you know, you're saying like, oh, we're to blame for that. I really think a lot of medicine and sex education is to blame for that. I mean, in medicine, they removed the clitoris from anatomy texts. They just made it non-existent. Medicine wasn't even acknowledging the clitoris until a couple decades ago. And forever, and still, it's
like the 80s or something, or the 90s. You're like, that's when 90s. It was discovered.
Oh my God, yeah, discovered. It was discovered. No, it was like 1800s it was discovered, but it was like, I call it the clitoral conspiracy. It was like a clitoral conspiracy to keep this information, because how dare women have pleasure? Oh my goodness, like that's not what it's about. And I think that if, so often the narrative is like, men have to have an orgasm, that's how babies are made. And if people thought women have to have an orgasm, that's how babies are made, then it would be more of our priority. But because it's not, it's like, whether or not that happens doesn't matter, because, you know, as long as there's ejaculate delivered, we can get to baby. And that is highly problematic, because it is just reducing women time and again to their reproductive capacity, which we are so much more than that.
Yeah, so true. Okay, so we spoke about the health benefits of orgasms, and then what actually then holds us back from actually being able to orgasm. So it was the word like, number one, okay, well, if you fake it, how the hell is your partner supposed to actually get you there? I think that that's going to be a big thing. Hormones, so let's talk about hormones, of how that can also be something that can get in our way.
Oh, yes. So whenever people, they're like, I have a low libido, I have difficulty orgasming, whatever the sexual dysfunction is, they jump right away to like, it must be my hormones. It can be your hormones, but it is often other things going on as well. Because so let's say like it starts with hormones. Let's say it starts with low estrogen. It can be estrogen issues because you're postpartum, because you're in menopause. Being on oral contraceptive pills can also mess with vaginal ecology as well, and your ability to self-lubricate. And so low estrogen is going to be problematic, because it can lead to tissue atrophy, difficulty self-lubricating. The tissue can become more sensitive, more friable. So if it's extreme, you can go to the bathroom, you can wipe, and then you're gonna find that there's blood on the tissue. Like, that's how extreme that it can get. And without estrogen, we can't produce the glycogen, the sugar that feeds the good organisms in the vagina. So now we're going to be predisposed to yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, and then those are going to be problematic. So all of these hinder your sex life. And with shrinking tissue, of course, that's going to affect your ability to orgasm, and you're going to need lubrication. But then we have all this shame about lubrication, right? Like, oh, you're not supposed to use that. You should be able to like self-lubricate, which is not always the case. I mean, depending on where you are in the cycle, if you are a week before your period, it's a dry time. You're going to have a harder time self-lubricating because of where your hormones are at. Your progesterone's up, your estrogen's taking a back seat to that, and that's completely normal. So you have that piece. Now, if you aren't using lubrication, the tissue is becoming inflamed, there's infections, which these are normal organisms that live there, but they become imbalanced. Now, when you have sex, there's an association with pain. You can have pain, discomfort, you're not having an orgasm. Now you're in your head about that, right? You don't want to have pain, or you've had pain in the past, so you have a fear. Now you're trying to have pleasure, but there's a fear around the pleasure. And so that's just one example of one hormone and how it can affect you. But I think where everybody usually goes in their mind is testosterone. Is that where you went?
Oh, I wasn't sure, to be honest, because my thing went to hormones. Like, okay, you just don't feel in the, your chemicals aren't pumping. That's kind of how I like blanketed it in my head. But then now, to your point of, well, even if your hormones you're not being self-lubricated as much, it's the mental thing that really freaking screws you. Because the second you get in your own head about, oh my God, I'm not as wet, now my husband doesn't think I'm turned on by him, right? Because now I worry, he may not worry, but I worry, he's interpreting this as I'm not into him. And now my mind goes into the whole thing. And so that was why I thought then I wouldn't be able to orgasm. Because of the way the hormone would impact my mind, not necessarily the testosterone versus the estrogen.
Well, and testosterone and estrogen, they really are like the go on the sex pedals. They're like, let's go. Progesterone is like, we're good, because progesterone rises after ovulation. So progesterone is basically like, you had your chance to go collect some semen and get pregnant. We did the egg thing. We're done here. And that is where the phase of your cycle where you're like, you know what? I'm really rather get into sweatpants than get into their pants. Like, I am good right now. And that's the progesterone. And so testosterone, people, I mean, I will sometimes get men who write me and they're like, you need to fix my woman's testosterone because she's not in the mood. And I'm like, you probably need to tend to your home life, and it's more than just testosterone, but low testosterone is associated with low sexual desire. You can have difficulty orgasming, and it can be involved in the arousal process as well. But it's something that I do see low testosterone in women, but it's more common postmenopausal in really high times of stress. It's not usually the main thing that's going on in terms of like what I commonly see. And people are always surprised by that. The birth control pill can definitely tank testosterone. That can be a reason why you have low sexual desire, which is ironic because you're on the pill so that you can have sex, and that is getting rid of that inhibition, which is the fear of having a baby if you don't want one. But then the way it changes your hormones can make it so that you're not in the mood. And you're like, I have yeast infections and my vagina is not self-lubricating and I have no testosterone. So like, I'm not into this. But with testosterone, for people who are curious about it, it's always beyond the low libido. So you'll have lack of motivation. You'll cry really easily. That kick-ass feeling, you won't have that anymore. That like ability to set boundaries, kick-ass, like have a great day. Your energy is going to be lower. You're going to be more fatigued. You're going to see that you have muscle mass wasting. So you'll have less muscle mass. It'll be harder to change your body composition. So you'll have a propensity towards more fat cells and less muscle cells like in the body. That's how things will shift. And so it's not usually just a low testosterone goes low libido and no other symptoms. You're going to have other symptoms with that as well. But you're absolutely right in terms of like the hormones do affect brain chemistry. They absolutely do influence, as we see throughout the menstrual cycle. So for example, when testosterone and estrogen are up, you are going to be more likely to fantasize. So you're going to be running fantasies in your mind. You're more likely to be in like the grocery store checkout line, see a magazine, and your brain to register sex. Your brain to be like, yes, that fellow looks good, or she's looking good. Like, and your brain is going to interpret like, that's sex. Like I'm into this. And so the hormones do absolutely play a role, but I think it's very short-sighted for us to only be talking about hormones. I say that as a hormone doctor, in that it's just women are much more complex than that. And while I do think the hormones should be evaluated, I think there's a holistic approach in this conversation that often gets missed by a lot of practitioners.
So what would you say are the holistic things that we need to, or we can be doing in these situations?
I will tell you, as a hormone doctor who is in a relationship, who's been married for over a decade, working on your hormones is easier than working on your relationship. And so I think
that's a bold statement.
It is very true. I mean, it's so much easier to be like, I'm going to shift my diet, I'm going to get better sleep, like do these things, because it's only you. You just have to be accountable to you.
Yeah.
And I see this all the time with patients where they're like, let's just fix my hormones. I'm like, but maybe you need to talk about your relationship. And they're like, oh, like that. I mean, it can definitely be work. It is definitely something that can be intense, because now we have a dynamic and we have to unpack our stuff and they have to unpack their stuff, and then you're putting it on the table together, and now you've got to sort through it. And like, and then how is your parents, like how is their relationship, like how have your past relationship, like it just becomes so complex and there's so much to it. And so working on relationships, that can't be understated, and working on your communication as well. If you can't talk to someone outside the bedroom about sex, how can you talk to them in the bedroom about sex, about what you want and how to get that pleasure? So there's that component. I think we also need to be looking at things like chronic conditions. So I think it's something that is widely dismissed in women. It's autoimmune disease and any kind of chronic health issue where they struggle for years, exhausted, pushing through. Like we have similar stories in that way of like really struggling with autoimmunity, being dismissed. And that is something that if your body's in survival mode for any reason, even if it's just because you have a stressful job, you're not going to want to be in the mood. You're going to have a harder time having pleasurable sex because your hormones are shifting for survival. So your cortisol is now coming up. You're shifting like, chill out progesterone, which I said can like block you in the bedroom. But yet if you don't have enough of it, you're more critical of your partner, you're more stressed out, you can't get good sleep at night. And so it's taking a look at like you as a whole person, the environment that you live in, your health practices, and what is your relationship like? And so we have to look at all of those layers to really understand, do you have a dynamic that is maybe impeding you in the bedroom, or is that fine? And like what we're dealing with is inflammation, which is taking your testosterone and turning it into estrogen, and now you're feeling cranky and swollen and bloated, and that's not a sexy feeling. That's like not a good feeling at all. And so we really have to dissect that out and understand what is the root cause for you, what's true for you, while also teaching the components of what we started at the top with, of like spontaneous and responsive desire, understanding your gas pedals and your brakes, like understanding these things, because sometimes people think they're not normal when in reality, they're totally normal. It just doesn't look like it does on TV.
Oh my God, that was so good, girl. So like, in your book, you break down like you just did, but you've got, the age, the hormones, the stress, the inflammation, and going back to what you were just saying, my gut issues were going on for years.
Yeah.
And so you want to talk about I wasn't in the mood, but it really impacted my connection with my husband. And so because I've built my relationship on pure honesty, that was a very hard conversation to have. But to your point of the communication, where I sat down with him and was like, look, it's painful for me. And he was, and of course, my husband's such a gentleman. He was just like, no, we're not doing anything. Like, babe, we need to make sure that your health is okay. And I was like, but we may not be able to have intercourse right now, but I need that connection with you. And he's always so generous. He's just like, but it shouldn't just be one way. Because like, he never felt good about it just being his pleasure. It was always, for both.
Yeah.
And I said, I understand, but actually right now, because I don't know if I can orgasm, I don't know if I use those words, but I don't know if I can get to that, but I still need to feel that connection. I still want to be intimate with you. And now what does this intimacy look like in a different way, where maybe I can pleasure him and things like that. But to your point of my gut was inflamed, and then I was very stressed out, and I was just tired all the time. And, we then feel shame around that. Like, I'm unable to please my partner.
Absolutely. And what's important in what you shared is so many people's definition of sex is a penis goes in the vagina. Like, there has to be penetration. And that's why I wrote a whole chapter on sex of all kinds, because there's all kinds of ways to be intimate. I have patients who have significant endometriosis. They cannot have penetration. It is very painful for them. That they can engage in oral sex or outer course. I mean, things that sometimes people think are like, that's some high school juvenile stuff. That's incredibly pleasurable for some people. And so there's lots of ways to connect. And if you look at the research, when people report sexual satisfaction, orgasm is actually lower. It's not one of the top things. Feeling empathy, feeling connected to somebody, actually feeling that intimacy, that's what makes for a pleasurable session no matter what you're doing. And so I think, we talk a lot about the orgasm. Everybody wants to try to get an orgasm. And it is, I think, something that is important to have conversations about. But I think it's important for people to understand that lots of people have very satisfying sessions, sexual experiences, and never have an orgasm in that session, and they still rate it very high, but it's because of the connection. So what you're talking about there of like the radical honesty, I mean, it really is radical in like our society, right? To be that honest, that kind of connection, being intimate with someone, just wanting to feel close to them, like doing it for those reasons results in much more satisfaction than somebody going in and just being like, we're just going to get this done so that we can get to orgasm and like be done with it. People report less satisfaction in those sessions.
And I think women need around 14 minutes of
Yeah.
foreplay and men only need like 5.
Yeah, men don't.
I was
Sometimes,
like, wow, even 5's high.
yeah, I mean, sometimes you're just like bending down in the freezer, like getting something out, and they're like, let's go right now, right? Because again, the brain is like sex,
Yeah.
serving that. And some women are like that too. And then they get told that like, oh, you're too much like a man, and I'm like, you're all good. You're all good. Like whatever is working for you, but. For women, yeah, I tell my patients, like, give it 20 minutes to warm up. Give it 20 minutes to warm up. And, you know, as we were talking about lubrication before, there's a phenomenon known as arousal non-concordance. And so in the research, they're like, why is it that like some women, it's like their brain is like showing they're turned on, but like their genitals are not turned on. Like what's going on? The brain is what gives consent, and the brain is the one to listen to. If you say yes and the genitals look like they're saying no because they're not getting the memo. The brain's like, we're really into this. And the genitals are like, huh? What? What's going on? And so they're not getting as, as engorged. We're not seeing as much lubrication. Like, that's happening. Nothing's wrong with you. Again, a case for lube. So nothing's wrong with you in that situation. And yet the brain sometimes surveys things. So I've had on my social media, Ask Dr. Brighton, a question that came up a lot, which I found really interesting, is women saying, I don't know what to make of it. I'll be scrolling through my feed on social media and I'll see someone doing a suggestive dance or doing something and I feel aroused. Like my genitals feel aroused. They don't say genitals. They're usually like my clitoris, like I feel my clitoris, or like my vulva like feels juicy, like, you know, using that kind of language. And they're like, and sometimes it's someone of the other gender. Like, am I bisexual? Am I actually gay? Like, what is actually going on here? And I'm like, that is just your brain being like, oh, sex. And the genitals are like, oh, sex, you said sex, okay. And then you're self-lubricating, like you feel this stirring in your nether region, so to speak. That is something as well, that if the brain, if you're like, wait, I'm not into this, you're not into this. That's a no. It doesn't mean that you're switching genders. It doesn't mean you're suddenly attracted to that person. It doesn't mean you want to cheat on your partner or anything like that. The brain just said, hey, this is sex. The genitals were like, yes, sex, love it, here for it. And then you caught yourself and said, I'm not actually into this. The brain is in control there. So if you give consent, but the genitals aren't following, it's still consent. If you say no and the genitals are doing something else, they're just like, I'm already on this train, friend. Like, we're just going that way. But your brain says no, that's not consent.
Wow, I love that you broke that down. And I assume men are not the same.
So here's the thing, men can, so this is like, there's so many jokes, and the arousal non-concordance gets talked about a lot more. So right, we have, oh, I'm really into her, but I can't get erect. And it's not necessarily erectile dysfunction. There can be other reasons for that. That's an arousal non-concordance. There are times where, especially like as someone who has a young boy, I'm like, these moments are going to come where they're at the dining room table and the brain picked up something as sex and they don't even know why, and now they have an erection, but they're not turned on, like they're not into this. And so it can definitely happen with men as well. But you know, a lot of times if men are in the mood and they're like, I want to have sex, then their penis is erect and then they're able to have sex, right? And so I think with us, things are a lot more complicated.
I love that you broke that down, because as you were talking, I'm like, I'm just going to be honest. Like, this is just weird for me to say out loud because I'm a little I was brought up when you never talk about sex.
Yeah.
So even this discussion, I freaking love, but there's still a part of me is a little embarrassed. But I'm just going to say it, like, you're 100% right. I can't remember what I was watching. It was like some show and they had gay sex and I was like, why am I turned on?
Yeah.
But it was like, it's not that I want to be a part of man on man sex. Like, but so I was very confused.
Yeah.
And so I turned to my husband. He's like, no, I'm not turned on. And he wasn't hard.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is very confusing for me because I'm not interested. But it didn't seem
That's
like...
really common, by the way. It's super common and most people don't say it out loud.
No.
But the homosexual sex, there's a lot of women who will watch that pornography. They are very turned on to it. Part of that can be because it feels like a safer situation as a woman than watching, like, because when it is heterosexual sex, that is, again, very male-centered, and the way that, you know, sometimes things are being done, a woman is like, there's a lot that's being done sometimes in pornography that women are like, that's not actually something I'm into. It's like why we have to have these conversations, because if men are learning their moves from porn, they're not really learning moves. Like, they're learning things that like stimulate their brain and give them the stimulation they need. That as a woman watching that, it's just like, yeah, that looks like that hurts. Like, I don't really want to do that. Or like, why are they doing that? And So that's why some researchers believe women are more inclined to watch gay pornography. And so watching men, sometimes they'll watch women as well, but men seem to be like a really safe one.
Wow, I never dawned on me that was the reason. And then it can somewhat be, I mean, I've said this a couple of times in this interview, it can be somewhat confusing for a guy.
Yeah.
Because to us, based on exactly what you just said, there's a massive difference between the fantasy and the reality. The fantasy, I'm like, you just want to keep it as a fantasy. You don't actually want it.
Yeah.
But I don't know, do guys do that? But also, it is confusing for guys because my husband was like, but you just said that was a fantasy. And I'm like, but babe, I don't actually want it.
Don't actually want it, yeah. No, so lots of people have fantasies about threesomes. They'll even fantasize about it like while they're having sex with their partner, that they never want to have a threesome. They just like the idea of it. And so fantasies, sometimes people, they keep their fantasies private. Sometimes they want to share it with their partner, and sometimes they do want to act them out. Maybe they have a fetish that they would like to try. All of that is normal. And, you know, when it comes to keeping your fantasies to yourself, sometimes that is what you need to make it hot, to make it something that you're into. And so I've had women ask me, like, if I'm thinking about someone else, like while I'm having sex with my partner, does that mean I'm cheating? It's not cheating. It's not cheating if you're fantasizing about somebody else being present, somebody else being engaged with you. But the thing I caution people is that if you are only thinking about someone else the entire time while you have sex with this person, then you really have to ask, are you using this person as a means to an end just to have sex? Or are you actually wanting to have that intimacy and that connection? Because that's not fair. That's not fair for you to be like, I just want to engage this body while I go somewhere else with my mind. But it is not uncommon for women to have all kinds of different fantasies running in their mind, and especially helping them get to orgasm. And sometimes you need that because the distractions of like, oh, there's a noise in the house, or I have children in the house, or you know, maybe somebody like might hear us at a hotel, or, you know, those kinds of fears. Sometimes you have to go into fantasy land to be like, I need to like escape that. And that actually helps you get present with what's happening in the situation, which seems odd to be like, I have to go into fantasy to be present in my body, but it's so that you're not constantly hit by all these distractions.
Oh my God, that's really powerful. Because I never really thought about it like that. And you kind of, when you don't have an expert like you to talk to, right? Like you get in your own head about what does this mean? But I'm turned on, but I'm thinking about someone. Like it's very confusing for women. And then again, the second you get in your own head, it's like, are you able to be present to then actually enjoy that moment?
Once you get in your head, it's like so hard to come back,
dude,
right?
Yeah, seriously. And you said it earlier. And maybe this is just like the very straightforward question. So if a guy is listening right now, how the hell do you make a woman come?
You ask her. So that's like number one. But so based on the research, we have very little studies in women's medicine and then very little studies into women's sexual health. But we do have some research, and every woman who owns a vulva will understand this, that rhythmic motion. So first, touching the clitoris in a rhythmic motion. Slow and low is the tempo. Like we want to keep it. I just quoted the Beastie Boys right now, but slow and low is the tempo. So you want to start with, you know, like not like super light pressure. We're not trying to tickle, but we don't want to go super firm. So it's going to be slowly moving like your hand towards the clitoris, and then low and slow movement. And you want to be rhythmic. And so most women prefer either circular or back and forth. You can use one finger, but most women prefer two, or even all your fingers or the palm of your hand. You can retract the clitoral hood. You can ask her to retract the clitoral hood. But as you're doing this, asking, is this good? Do you like this? Do you want more of this? And I think the hard part is that as you get excited, as the person stimulating the clitoris, not to then speed things up or start changing things up. And I think that's, you know, sometimes when men are about to climax, they speed things up and they go faster. And so they're like, this is my experience, so maybe this is what's good for you as well, when that's not always the case. And so communicating. So that's manual stimulation. But I hear from people that are like, but I want to make her come while we're having sex. Like I want to have, like, want to achieve that vaginal orgasm that Freud talked about. And so, so with that, there is research to show that if she orgasms before penetration, she is more likely to have an orgasm during penetrative sex. And while most men understand that to be true is that they have a very long refractory period. So that means once they orgasm, they're not able to just go round 2 right away. And so they'll think like, oh, that must be the same for her. Like once she orgasms, it's going to be harder to get her there. Not true. We have a shorter refractory period. Again, the clitoris is always giving, and Mama Nature knew what she was doing. And so you can stimulate her, she can orgasm, then you can go into penetration. She is more likely to orgasm. She may even have multiple orgasms. And while you're penetrating, you still want to stimulate the clitoris. So you can try different positions. She can do it herself. You can do it yourself. You can put a pillow under her hips in missionary so that things are more exposed. Or you can bring toys in. And this is where men will say like, oh, I don't want to have to compete with a toy. It is not a competition. I'm like, you're Batman, and that is literally your utility belt. Like, you just pull out from the utility belt. Like, what is it gonna be? Cock ring, vibrator, like, what do you want? Like, what works for you? And so you should be seeing it as an ally. It's not competing with you in any way. And it is going to make things more pleasurable. And in fact, like with some men, I'm like, well, have you ever like tried having any vibration present? No. I'm like, it works for you too. Like it's going to help you too. So those are just some of the things that you can do. But like the number one is you just have to be asking, do you like this? Are you into this? Because even though I'm like, this is what like in general most people like, she may be into something different.
That's amazing. I love how you broke that down. And then as you're talking, it's like we all make it about ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, if the guy is able to get her to orgasm, he feels good. If he's able to get her to multiple orgasm, he feels great. If he's able to get her to multiple orgasm and squirting, he feels like a freaking stud. Right? And so it's almost like it's you got me here. Yeah. And then vice versa for women. Like I remember where it was like, oh, you can't get hard. Oh my God, what have I done wrong? Oh my God, I must be bad. Oh my God, I can't turn you on. Yeah. It is me. I'm the one. And now thinking about the guy, like I'm always trying to see it from both sides of it. Yeah. Like even though we've been, had our own rough time of it, I do think of it like, well then that's actually, I feel bad for the guy as well. Because now you're making it about yourself, and then as a woman, you're like, am I not sexy enough? Am I not turning you enough? And then the guys probably thinking, no, it has nothing to do with that. And now everyone gets in their own head, and now you're not having this beautiful like moment that could really be beautiful. How do we not make it about ourselves and like help that other person get there? And I know you're gonna probably say communication.
Well, I think you also have to, practice throughout the day, checking yourself when you start to make things. So we're on social media, right? And somebody leaves us a comment. Oh my God, like this is about me. Like, how is this? Like, they think this, you know what? People saying nasty things on social media, it's about them. Like, what kind of person goes onto someone else's page and leaves them hateful stuff? Not a well person. But we make those kinds of things about ourselves. So stopping that there. Thinking about all the ways that like you already do that in your day to day, you're going to build that neuronal pathway. So that when you get into that situation, you will have the brakes to be like, wait, maybe it's not about me. It's very, very hard. It is I think as women, we are challenged with almost an impossible task, which is loving ourselves and being confident in our bodies, being confident in our relationships while we are inundated from messages in our society that constantly tell us that we're not good enough, that we are the problem. We look at marketing from like the 1950s that was like, if you want to keep a man, you need a douche. Like literally saying stuff like that. Like, oh, he'll leave the house if it smells down there. And I'm just like, I can tell you're a man writing this. I already know. Like, you're really telling on yourself how little you understand about the female body. Yet that kind of undercurrent of marketing, like that is pervasive, right? I mean, we think about things that are like, oh, this is going to be like the age defying because heaven forbid you live long enough that you get old. Like, what is that? But it's the same way when it comes to sexual health. And, in the book I talked about the different things that we see. So like, My So-Called Life, Vampire Diaries, like, but for real, like, how are vampires getting erections and getting wet? I just don't understand. I don't understand this. But we see like all of these TV shows and we see all these things where there's no talk of consent, there's no condom, right? It is just I see you, you see me, like we're making out, ooh, now we're having hot sex, oh, she orgasmed immediately, and like everything is perfect. And so we've got all
And
of that.
orgasm vaginally, not clitoral.
Oh yes. Oh yes. It's always like, oh, against the wall in like some like all these positions. And I'm like, but yeah, I think that's probably gonna get in some people's heads about like, wow, okay, like I should be having this wild, adventurous sex. And so it's a challenge, and we have to acknowledge that it's a challenge. And the biggest thing is just to build the awareness and open communication in your relationship. And if you find that there's anything that seems like, oh, this is not going according to plan, change the plan. So that's why I'm like, here's all of these options of sexual experiences that people have. Like, there are a lot of ways that people find pleasure, they can get off. Like there's many ways to hit the O, and there's many ways to just feel connected to your partner. And so even if things, I think that again, it becomes this like, we have to have vaginal penetration for it to be successful. Even the word foreplay, it said, like that word itself indicates that there is something more. You might orgasm with foreplay. You might both be satisfied with foreplay, but because it's called foreplay, the thought is like, no, this can't be enough. Like we have to get to the end. We have to arrive at vaginal penetration, which is like not true.
Yeah, it's so true. The blessing and the curse of porn. Like I think porn's getting a really bad rap right now.
Oh yes, we can talk about that.
Yeah, please, let's do it, because I think that like anything, it can be great, it can be detrimental. And so when I think about where we're potentially setting up women and men for failure, there's definitely porn messaging out there that you can just wham bam, thank you ma'am, and you're good to go, you're fine. But then also there is that part of like, porn can be pleasurable and porn can be part of the experience. What if you have different opinions of porn in your relationship?
Yeah, well, gosh, I mean, as much as shame and stigma there is on sex, there's tons on porn. Even the fact that we're talking about this right now, there's already going to be people heated in the comments because people feel very passionately, and they usually feel very passionately, they're very much against it.
Why is that?
Well, it's so the equivalent of men feeling they're in competition with a vibrator is how a lot of women feel about porn. They're in competition with that. And there is messaging from other men who are like, porn ruins you in the way that like it will lower your testosterone, it makes it so that you're not self-disciplined, like all of these, just like why they also are like, you shouldn't masturbate, it'll ruin your hormones. And I'm like, that's false. It's good for your hormones. Men should masturbate or be having ejaculation happening like a dozen times a month for their prostate health. Like we know this, like retention is not the way, friends. So with that, I think there's a lot of religious connotation, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of misunderstanding about porn, of why people view porn. There's a lot of money made in the porn addiction industry. So there's no real diagnosis for sex addiction, and yet sex addiction, porn addiction, masturbation addiction, there are very much many people with that messaging of pushing that out there, making a lot of money off of doing that. And so we've got that messaging as well. And then of course, there is unethical porn. There is porn that nobody should be consuming. It should be shut down and it should not ever exist. Absolutely those exist. But at the same time, there is ethical porn. There are companies that are being run by women who are paying women fair wages, that are making sure that women are protected, and it's really amazing. And I would say that, growing up, I definitely got the message of like, porn is bad. Like I did not have a sex positive family. I had a don't talk about sex, and if you do, we're gonna shame you about it kind of family. And so I got that message as well. When I was practicing in Oakland, California, I had a lot of patients come from the porn industry, and I had no idea until I got into conversations with them, and they were all talking about how much they love their jobs, how much they were like families, how it was like so satisfying. And it was really interesting to have conversations with people who were part of the industry and loved it so much, and to really see that like these things that people say about porn, the people who are working like in the production, I mean, women working in the production, women who are actually like the stars, all really enjoying their job, all really loving what they do. And so I think, if you look at other societies where they have better sex education, so we just look at like Amsterdam, better sex education, access to sex workers, these things are an important part of society, and people hate that in the US. They hate thinking that sex workers have a place in people's health, but people need that connection. People need pleasure. And sometimes that's the only way that they're satisfying things. I think the problem comes is when we're lying about things, we're in a partnership, we're not being honest, like those kinds of things are the problem. And hiding porn from your partner, I think, is also problematic, and that will really seed even further where people are like, porn is problematic. Why would you hide it otherwise? And it's like, shame is why people hide these things. But you're right. So in a partnership, you have to just have this conversation. Porn has to be consensual. You have to agree on the type of pornography you're going to watch. And there has to be an understanding that if any one person says turn it off, you turn it off. And and in anything you do, consent can always be revoked. And if you violate that, that person says turn it off, and you say, oh, just give it a few more minutes, like you just burnt the bridge. You just burnt the bridge. It's done. This person, you have violated their trust in that, because they need to be able to feel safe in this. And so your partner might be like, I can try this for 2 minutes, and like, then we're good. I actually have, in our house, we have a rule about movies and TV shows. Like if we're going to start something, we're iffy about it. We're like 5-minute rule. 5-minute rule. And we'll give it 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, we'll check in. And so that's just movies and TV. You can also do that with porn. 5-minute rule. Okay. After 5 minutes, we're going to check in. Is this working for us? Do we want to proceed?
And how much do you think that all of this needs to be discussed, either before sex, as in before you actually have the act, or before you actually start having a sexual experience with another person?
So I think, so things are going to evolve. So as you start a relationship, you might not even know that you're like, oh, I might want to watch porn, or I'm really into sucking toes, or like any of these. You might not know that about yourself. And being in this relationship with this person is revealing those things. So as the relationship progresses, now you know you're into this thing. Now you want to have the conversation. You want to ideally have that outside the bedroom, because this is something where, I mean, there can be trauma, there can be a lot of issues that come up. And if you make for a negative experience, it's going to be harder to come back. That's, again, right? Hormones are easier than relationships. Coming back from that's going to be so much harder than talking about it beforehand. So the ideal is before you're in the moment. But sometimes things come up in the moment, that's when your brain is like, we would really like this. We should do this. And that's where you ask, like, I would really be into this. Like, do you want to try that? Or, hey, can I do this with you? Things that get labeled as kink, they're actually really common. It's funny that we think like this is that like seedy kink stuff. So like spanking is part of kink. It's really common in relationships for people to enjoy spanking. Do I use that as an example of like, you might be in the moment, you're in a position and you're like, I really want to spank this person. You need to ask first. You don't want to just spank someone, and you want to start gentle. Again, slow and low, like keep it gentle. And then you can ask, like, would you like it harder? Like, do you like that? Can I, do you like it when I grab you? Like, these kinds of things like that. You're getting the consent, and then you're getting the feedback in real time, because you may get excited and think like, oh, this is a really, great thing, and I'm really into it and they're into it. But if you're not asking, or they're not giving you the cues and the feedback that is saying like, I am into this, like you're going to run into a problem. And now nobody's satisfied, everybody's stopping, and the fun's done.
Yeah. What's happening in your body chemically when that happens? So because I'm thinking through like in that moment, right, it's really heated.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, this is great. And then the next day you're like, oh, actually my hormones led me astray, and actually it was my body wanting, but my mind now regrets it.
Oh yeah, that's super common. I actually heard Brene Brown say the vulnerability hangover. And I was like, that's exactly what happens after sex. Like she's talking about, talking about intimate things and being vulnerable. And yet during sex, you're so vulnerable. And then you do things, right? You do things and you're like, oh my God, I loved that. That was so great. And then the next day you're like, what does that say about me? And what do they think? And like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And maybe that's a bad thing. And like, oh God, did I hurt my body in a way that I'll never come back from? Like we start to spiral in that way. It can definitely happen. But I think part of it too is that like, when it's just like what people will call vanilla sex, right? Missionary, cis hetero sex, like that is something that we are told is acceptable, is safe, like is normal. When you deviate outside of that, there is the risk that afterwards you're going to think like, oh gosh, I really wish I hadn't done that. Now you may very well be like, I wish I hadn't done that because I actually didn't enjoy it. I actually didn't want it, and that's a different thing.
Of course,
But
yeah.
I think that, that vulnerability hangover, that after the fact, like I don't have like all this dopamine and all these hormones floating around in my brain anymore, not feeling that anymore. Now afterwards, to remember that you are being a historian and going back and looking at the event now from the outside and judging it from the outside rather than the experience in the moment. Like you were consenting to these things, you were in the moment, it was good for you in the moment, but now historian you puts on your little spectacles and is like, no, you're a bad person for doing that.
Because all of your belief system comes flooding back in.
Yeah. And everyone else's ideas about who you should be comes into play.
Right, yeah. What's happening when it's like you like the riskiness of it? And like, so my husband is actually a little conservative. I'm the one that's like, oh babe, but like there's a beach, there's no one on the right, like, and it's interesting because growing up, I never perceived that as being the right quote unquote dynamic. I always thought it's the guy that's adventurous, right? And then the woman's like, well, I'm not sure. And then I met my husband, and he kind of not laughed in a bad way, but he was like, wow, you're really freaking kinky. And I'm just like, yeah, and you're not. Like, and it was surprising to me that my husband, again, just being from a very traditional background, I was brought up to think a certain way. And so I actually thought, oh my God, is it normal that I'm the one in the relationship that wants the kinkiness?
Yeah.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now.
How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside.
No, it is totally normal. And it's those exciting things too. So that is, like, why do people ride roller coasters, right? It's terrifying. Your brain's getting all jostled around, like you feel like you're gonna die. And yet here's this cue, like, you know, you're waiting for like 2 hours just to get on and experience that, like, you know, 2 minutes of just terror, right? It's the same thing. Like, it's exciting, like it's something new. And in relationships, especially relationships that go for a longer period of time, spicing things up, changing things up, finding ways to make things exciting, that's actually healthy. It's a healthy thing to do. And a lot of women. There's a lot of women who also get called kinky and things like they're not supposed to be that way, but it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what your gender is. Whatever you like and you're into and is happening consensually, that's normal.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I feel good about myself now. Yeah. And then I'd be remiss to not talk about the whiskey vagina, I think you call it. I thought it was so fun, if you don't mind talking to me about that. Because I want actually guys to hear this, because I'd heard it very much about guys, that when they drink, it's more common they're going to have erectile dysfunction.
Yes.
But the whiskey vagina, talk to me about that, girl.
No, totally, right? Because the term is like whiskey dick, that they'll say. Like, you drink too much and now you cannot get an erection, or you can't orgasm. It's difficult to orgasm. The same thing can happen to women. And this is where it gets problematic, because a lot of times women go to their doctor, they say like, oh, I'm having pain with sex, I'm not enjoying sex, like there's problems. Their doctor's like, get some lube, have some wine. Have a few glasses of wine and you'll be fine. But actually, when you're intoxicated, it can be more difficult to self-lubricate, more difficult to become aroused. Like, you're using a substance that is affecting your nervous system and is depressing your nervous system. So everybody knows, like, your reaction time is down, right? This is why we don't drink and drive. If you are drinking and driving, please do not do that, actually. But this is why, you know, we say those things, is because your reaction time's down. You have depressed the nervous system. Well, what's the clitoris? A bundle of about 10,000 nerves. So how is that going to respond to stimuli when you've used a drug that now is basically like numbing things out? And so we can have issues with arousal, tissue becoming engorged. We can have the lubrication issue, but it can be incredibly frustrating because you're like, I cannot orgasm. It's been like 40 minutes and I'm getting raw. Like, what is happening? Even in a solo session, it can be incredibly difficult to orgasm because you're intoxicated.
Okay, and so I assume multiple orgasms can be even harder to have.
Oh, yeah.
And so talk to me about actually multiple orgasms and squirting, because I'm just going to assume, can I lose faith in myself? But it's very interesting to go, ooh, how can I figure out how to squirt?
Yeah.
Like, I was the person that started with I can't orgasm. It's just not me.
Yeah.
I'm one of those unfortunate people that
Totally.
can't, right? That's where I started from. Then I met my husband, my life changed, multiple orgasms out of, whatever. And then the squirting part is like, okay, is this a type of person that can do it? Is it something that you can train, just like going to the gym? And then is it benefits to squirting?
Yeah, there's no known benefits to squirting, so I'll just say that.
What a shame.
Some people, I know, right? But we haven't studied it much because even, the jury's out of like, is it just urine or is it like, what is it? There seems to be there's some urea in the fluids, but it also has a sweet taste to it. So it appears to be coming from the Skene's gland. So that's all to say, you're not just peeing. So people will be like, oh, you're just peeing. No. It's not just peeing, because they've actually done imaging, finding that the bladder, someone empties their bladder, they have sex, they squirt, but then they're like, oh, but then there was fluid in the bladder when we imaged again. So it's all very confusing. And really, so many people like to pathologize it or just make it like, oh, that's just a porn thing, which in porn, they will pee and they will like push and bear down to make that urine squirt. Do not recommend. You're going to destroy your pelvic floor and end up with urinary incontinence at some point in your life, but definitely as you age if you keep up that practice. So not a good idea. So in theory, everyone should be able to squirt, but it's not something that like anything's wrong with you if you don't squirt. It sometimes takes certain positions. Sometimes there's toy stimulation happening. Sometimes women only experience it while they're pregnant, where there's all this pressure, all of this circulation down there. Sometimes women only experience it with anal sex. So it really just depends.
Wow, with anal sex, because it's pressing down?
That's the thing that I'm like, anatomy-wise, like where you are, like why does it work? Why does it work that way? And it could be that there's clitoral stimulation, that there's penetration in the anus, and then from that stimulation, the Skene's glands, they shoot off, so to speak. So
I've always thought also about squirting about from women who are more promiscuous. Is that true?
No. And that's something that, like, I feel like there's always some myth going around about being more promiscuous with women. Whether it's like, you're going to have a loose vagina, you'll ruin yourself for marriage, you're going to get more infections, and you can be at higher risk for STIs, and you definitely, more partners you have. Same is true for men, though. Same is true for men.
Speaking of actually being loose, I know that's one thing that a lot of women, I haven't had children, so I don't really know. But I've heard that that's one thing that women are paranoid about.
Yeah.
And so my question is, just out of curiosity, is it paranoia because they don't like the feeling or because they're worried they can't please their partner?
It's the latter in most cases. Women are told all the time that like loose vagina is like the worst thing ever. Yeah, the vagina doesn't really work that way. I mean, it's essentially an accordion of tissue. Like it expands. It passes a whole human, and you will have more tissue because it expanded. There's a lot of people who report better sex, both partners, better sex after vaginal delivery. Part of that may be because you got so comfortable with your body. Part of that may be because there is more tissue there. Another part is because things actually spread. The clitoris is more exposed now. There was a lot more sensation. There was a lot more hormones flowing in the body. So there can be changes that are beneficial from that. But I think what's really problematic is that I see all the time men on the internet being like, oh, you want it tight. A tight vagina is the best. And I always laugh because I'm like, you really have no idea what you're talking about. Like, this is another, like, tell me you don't know the female body without telling me, because a tight vagina is not a ready vagina. It is the equivalent of a flaccid penis. Like, this is not somebody who is interested in anything that you have going on right now, because things are being locked down. I think about, like, the movie Alien, and Sigourney Weaver's like running through like these like portholes, right? And it's like closing in. Like, that is the vulva being like, oh my God, alien. Like, this is like, we do not want anyone foreign in here right now. And so that can actually be a sign then someone is not ready, someone is afraid, and it sometimes can be a case of vaginismus. And so we don't want a tight vagina. When you become aroused, the vagina actually tense. So the tissue expands, the cervix will actually move back, and it's like maybe there will be penetration. We don't know, but we're ready. We're going to be ready either way. That is arousal. That is somebody who is into you. That is like you've put in the work, like things are ready to go. If things are tight, that's not it. And that's, I would say, on the same vein of talking about childbirth, the husband stitch. I talk about this in the book. I think it is a very gross practice in medicine. There's still a lot of abuse of the female body, especially in obstetric violence, when it comes to what physicians do. And the husband stitch, especially because it's often being done without consent, is where they put an extra stitch. So if you tear, or if they cut you, which really has no evidence, they shouldn't be doing that. But if you tear, because that does happen, and they stitch you up, sometimes they're like, oh, put an extra stitch at the top for your husband because it'll make sex better. And ultimately what it actually does is it causes pain with sex, and nobody has sex. Now there's actually no sex. So tell me how you, like, modifying and manipulating her vagina with a man only in mind, not her body in mind, doing it for her husband, has actually helped anyone. It hasn't. Now he's not having sex. She hates sex. Like, it's very problematic.
I know people getting like almost like plastic surgery on this. Like, oh God.
Yeah, this is the thing that I find really concerning, is that clitoral anatomy isn't really taught in medical schools, and it's not, like, we just are figuring it all out. And yet you have surgeons out there with a knife cutting up this area so that it looks good without any real thought to how does it feel, how does it function. And that is very problematic, I think, in what medicine will do to women's bodies sometimes. Is it's more about the aesthetics. Is it aesthetically pleasing? Rather than thinking about the function. Because your vulva wasn't made to be stared at. Like, your body isn't made to be looked at. Your body has all of these amazing functions that it performs, and yet everything always comes back to, like, how does your body look? How does your body look? I mean, this is something after I had my second child, and I had, like, I was 40, so very different collagen, very different everything going on. But I had a much larger postpartum belly afterwards. And I took photos and I just shared it online. And I'm like, your body isn't made to be looked at. It's not. Your body, like, look what my body accomplished. And then when you think about sex as well, are you having pleasurable sex? Are you enjoying it? Then who cares what it looks like down there if you're enjoying it? And that is where I think we're doing a really big disservice. The funny thing is, so here's where I ended up on some seedy websites and stuff. So I actually, like, made a trip to Pornhub, because when you look at why physicians say labiaplasty is happening, so that's actually taking away of the tissue of the labia, what people call the lips, mostly to get rid of the inner labia, so that it's tucked in all nice and neat.
God.
I know, right? I like can't help but, like, Kegel every time I talk about it. Like, my little vulva's like, oh no, oh no, like, it's terrifying to think about. And there are some women, they do get it done because they are struggling with body image, or they are having discomfort because there is such hypertrophy. So I don't want to shame or dismiss anybody who's getting it done for those reasons, and it has improved their life. But what's problematic is that women are being told, like, oh, like, your vagina doesn't look, or your vulva doesn't look right. So we're talking about the outer tissue. Your vulva doesn't look right, therefore you need to have this surgery. Doctors are looking to porn and saying, this is because of porn. We blame porn for this. So I was like, well, I want to know. What do we have, like, trimmed up labia going on in porn? No, we do not. I had saw so much variety of vulvas, and I found on Pornhub they, like, voted, like, top vulvas. They didn't use the anatomically correct terms, but we're doing that here. And with that, there was the top voted was what people call the outie vagina, which is where the labia minora is actually on the outside. And they voted, everything was, like, so much variety. And then I went and I got my Netter's anatomy textbook and I opened it up and I was like, it's us. We're the problem. Here is a pink, uniform and color vulva that is only an innie, and this is all we're showing in medicine. You go to Medscape, you go to, like, these websites, these physician, based websites, and it is the white archetype of, like, uniform and color and everything neat and tucked away and uniform and symmetrical, and I'm like, it's us. It's not porn. Porn is like, give me all the variety, which is also to say that if you're a woman and you're concerned, like, my male partner, is going to look at it and think, it turns out they're really into it. They're really into the variety down there. That is what, per the porn surveys, that men are craving. So that to me was, like, such a light bulb moment of, like, medicine is the one that only shows like this uniform, perfect vulva. Like that is who is showing all of that. And when you look at pornography, it is real bodies. Like, and yes, there is augmentation, there is labiaplasty, there are breast implants, like all of that happens. But then there is also like all of these very real bodies where men are actually like, I want to see a postpartum body. Like I want to see like these different changes, which is what does outside of that sphere, we are told something completely different, right? Like it's like there's this like there's the truth that lies underneath the aesthetic of it all.
What's interesting though, as you were talking, I was like, but actually I think they do a disservice to guys, because at least in the porn that I've seen, it's always like they're always huge.
Yeah.
And it's like I've heard you even talk about the Goldilocks penis or whatever.
Right?
And I was like, it's funny because porn may help women if you just watch it and go, look, we're ladies, like there's all types. Like men like all this. But with the guys, I've never seen a guy that's like got a small penis.
Yeah.
It's always a gigantic
I know.
horse.
Now I'm like, I have to go research that.
Isn't it true?
Yeah, I mean, it is like you think about like the movie Boogie Nights, like the whole reason they wanted Mark Wahlberg, not because he was just Mark Wahlberg and he's beautiful, but because like, you know, he had a long Johnson, like there was all this talk around that. It's so funny though, when you talk to women are terrified of large penises. And my friend who's a urologist, we were in a conversation and I was talking about how like, whenever people ask me if size matters, I'm like, it does. Because if it's too big, it's scary, or like you have to make accommodations, and like it's not the, you know, people are like, oh, if they have a micro penis, it will be you know, horrible and all of these things, and it's like, but you don't even orgasm from penile penetration. Like clitoris is the way. So there's lots of people who are in partnerships with someone who has a quote micro penis. And
for people at home that may not know, it's like what, 3 inches?
Yes. So it's you know, not what you would see on the porn scale, right? Where those are like 8 inches plus. As we're talking about this, I'm like, wow, like I need to do more research. But lots of people have very pleasurable sex with penises that size because the way to orgasm is clitoral stimulation. So penis is not even required. Some people love penis, some people don't. Like, and that's really about personal preference. But when I was talking to my friend who's a urologist, he's like, I hear that all the time. He's like, any man who has a long penis that, or a wide penis, that is their biggest problem, is they're like, I cannot find a sexual partner because I don't want to hurt them. Like there's a struggle with that. So you're right, there is what we see in porn, and that can be a big disservice to men. But really that's like, it's so ironic, right? Because it's like we've got female bodies and we've got variation. Why is it that men want to see large penises? Like, is this a power thing? Is this like, and it's just so interesting to think about that and how that's glorified. And that might be another reason why women aren't watching the heterosexual porn, is because big penises can be really scary. Yeah. I mean, I was just in conversation with 2 women yesterday, and they were like, oh yeah, like I had to get out of relationships because his penis was too big. And I was like, I didn't know what to do with this. And it was scary and it was hurting and I was just having problems. And in the book, I talk about the O-nut, which is an accommodation. So you can actually slide that on, and it's just basically like little spacer rings so that you have a buffer there. And then he's still getting stimulated, he's still getting pleasure, but you're controlling the depth of penetration. I'm like, how did somebody not invent this like decades ago? Like this is such a needed device, because it's a real bummer to have compatibility with somebody in all the ways, and then sexually it's incredibly frustrating and you can't have pleasurable sex together. And I know there's people who are like, that's so superficial and that shouldn't matter. It does matter. It is a part of the relationship that does matter, that can be part of the, you know, the shame spiral that you can get into.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because that's what I was going to add, is that like then like we're already dealing with, and things that we've spoken about so much today, right, is how much shame and guilt that we have over things because we've been told a certain way, which actually isn't true. Yeah. And like, again, I'm always trying to see it from the other side. I'm like, I actually get the problem with the guys, because they're seeing porn where they're seeing, oh my God, look at this guy. He's like, you know, 10 inches or whatever. He's making women squirt left, right, and center. Yeah. That's what a quote unquote man must be. And so now if I've got whatever size, I'm now either less than, or I'm comparing. And then thinking about the guys that have the micro penis, like that really fucking sucks for them, because women have been shown in porn that actually what makes a man, again, I'm doing quote unquote for anyone just listening, is the bigger the better. And I'm now thinking about how that does the men a disservice, and then they feel the shame, and then what they bring into the bedroom, right, with the confidence part of it, I'm sure then just changes everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about just how much people are shamed about their bodies in general, and then you take it to the genitals, and it's a whole next level, right? I mean, it is, I think when it comes to genital shame, it is just as bad for men as it is for women. I think there's a lot more euphemisms and jokes that have been thrown around about female anatomy, and men have been able to dominate spaces where they throw that around. And so that has been something I think has gotten more attention. But I mean, it is completely socially acceptable to shame somebody for having a small penis when you look at what happens in media, when you look at what happens just in conversations online, is that socially it's okay to have a laugh about that, and it really shouldn't be.
Yeah. The last thing is, where is our G-spot?
Oh, highly debated. Does it even exist? Yeah. So it used to be thought that like on the anterior wall, so belly button side, about like, you know, about the two knuckles in, maybe a little bit further, there's a G-spot. This is now very highly debated, because now that we understand the clitoris isn't just this little button, but it's like this wishbone structure that comes down, the question is now, is it actually the clitoris? Like, is it actually the internal clitoris that has been being stimulated? And so this is something that like you will see, I mean, people fight about this. Like they get big mad about like, no, of course there is a G-spot. No, there's no way there's a G-spot. Like that's just misinformation. And like, and what, people trying to help you have better sex? Is that like horrible? What it comes down to is that I'm like, if you find that's pleasurable, who cares what spot it is? Like, who cares what spot it is if you find it pleasurable? There's some people who like their cervix stimulated. They find that incredibly pleasurable. There's people having nipple-gasms. There's people thinking off. Like, whatever it is, if you can check the box that was pleasurable for me, it's normal. And who cares what we call it or what we name it? Like, you don't have to have, like, I feel like that is part of like, you know, what magazines and everything do, is they've got a name like, you know, the next best orgasm, like the coregasm, you can get off by working out. And I'm like, it's a very spontaneous thing. Nobody's intending to, they're just like doing a core exercise, and then they're like, something just happened. Or the pee-gasm, which is where you have to pee so bad. Usually this happens like in the middle of the night. You wake up and you're like, I'm having an orgasm. That's because like there's just so much stimulation happening there. I don't advise that. Don't try for a pee-gasm. Holding your bladder that long, you're gonna end up with a UTI. That's bad news. Just work on what feels good for you, what's pleasurable for you. And if you're in a partnership, the boxes you check is that it was consensual and we both enjoyed ourselves. And then we do not worry about what we're calling what we're labeling things, whether it's kink, whether it's not kink, what your doctor would say about it, what your mom would say about it. Like, we just don't care. Just don't care.
It's normal.
It's normal.
Oh, yeah. Girl, where can people find you, everything you're doing, and your amazing book, Is This Normal?
Yeah, so Is This Normal is everywhere that books are sold. And then you can find me at Dr. Jolene Brighton on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and then my main hub is drbrighten.com, which I have a ton of women's health information that you can access for free and learn all about your body.
Keep watching to learn the most mind-blowing facts that you never knew about hormones.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Aviva Rom.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Oh my God, I am so excited. And where I want to start is really the thing that I talk about a lot on my show, and the thing that a lot of the women come to Women of Impact for, is really when we don't feel good about ourselves, we have the negative voice that holds us back, we don't think we're good enough, we have insecurities that really do hold us back from living the life that we want. And to not talk about our hormones would be an utter disservice to the audience, and able for them to really take power over their lives and have the life that they want. So I'm very excited to have you here. And the one thing that I want to start talking about is, you talk a lot about us women as we deal with, acne, weight gain, depression, sleep problems, anxiety. There's all these different issues that we deal as adults. And it really does stem from our hormones. And I wanted to talk about actually something that you said that hit me so hard, and this seems to be the absolute right place to start, is you said now girls are starting to get their periods at the age of 7.
Yeah, so what we know is girls are going into puberty earlier than ever. And just to give you an example, the Kotex company that produces all those feminine products actually a bunch of years ago started creating a line of Kotex pads for girls as young as 7 and 8 years old with hearts and stars and unicorns and rainbows to normalize getting their periods earlier. What we're seeing though is most girls are starting with breast development earlier and then periods maybe like 1 or 2 years later. So we're seeing breast development 6, 7 years old now. And it's all environmental hormonal impact. That's what's so scary. It's also preventable, which is the good news. But yeah, it's crazy to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, so crazy. And the reason why I really wanted to start there is to really understand where our hormones as women really first kick into gear, if you will. Obviously, there's nothing that we can do about, when we started our own periods and when our own hormones kicked in. But I think by understanding why now things are changing and why we're seeing such a big increase in depression and all these other health issues, and being able to look and see where does it actually stem from? Because once we understand where it stems from and why, then I would love for us to really dive deep, girl, into how we as adults now either reverse it, identify our problems, and then use it as a superpower, if you will, to pick ourselves back up and really give us the strength that we need to achieve anything in life.
I love that. And to what you were saying about who your audience is and, women really wanting to take like this high level power over their lives. One thing a lot of people don't know, I mean, if you're experiencing it, you know it, but kind of more globally, is that period pain, endometriosis, all these hormonal imbalances are actually costing women money and career advancement. So we're held back by something that we actually have control over, but you miss those days of work 2 or 3 days a month because your period is, got you doubled over in pain or whatever it is that's going on. It could even be acne. Someone with severe acne, they don't go to a job interview, they don't go to graduate school interview because they're so embarrassed. So this is very serious in terms of like really taking our power, and that's what I know your community really wants. So where does it start? Well, naturally, if we were kind of going along with our biological blueprint that's been guiding women from the beginning of time, we would start our menstrual cycles around 12 to 16 years old. But this has been creeping back over the last couple of decades to where girls are now often starting their cycles at 9, 10 years old on average, and then the outliers even earlier. And breast development starts a couple of years before that. But where does it really start? We're already forming our ovaries and our eggs and our hormonal foundations when we're still in our mom's bellies. So we really want to think, as if we're thinking as upstream as possible, we want to think about what are pregnant moms being exposed to, environmental chemicals, herbicides, pesticides in foods, things that we're putting on our bodies in terms of our cosmetics, and a whole host of exposures that we do know actually pass on to the babies. So I don't want anybody feeling guilty or stressed out or worried, but at the same time, there are things that we can start to do, which I know we're going to talk about. And then another area that a lot of people don't know about, you hear about the microbiome, but what is that and what does it matter? But the microbiome also has a huge influence on how our hormones shake out for any one of us. And at least in the US, women by the time we're 18 years old have had on average, get this, 20 rounds of antibiotics. Not 20 days, not 20 doses, but 20 like 3 to 10 days of antibiotics. And then we get more antibiotics, of course, in our 20s for the UTIs and all of that. So that can affect the microbiome, that can then affect your hormones. So I really say all this not to overwhelm people with information, but if there's any takeaway that I want women to have from a conversation like this is that if your hormones are wonky, if things are going on, it's not your fault. It's not something you're doing wrong. Yes, there are things you can do about it, but you're not broken, you're not messed up. There are just these factors that happen before we even had a say-so that may have set us down, one track instead of another track, and the track that we got set down might be period pain or endometriosis or polycystic ovary syndrome or acne or fertility challenges, but it's not your fault.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think we do, or as women in general, right? We put things on our own plate and on our own shoulders. And that is such an important part too. And I love that we started there, because it is such an important part for this discussion, so that people don't blame themselves, because I think then the blame gets in the way of finding the solution. And I know that you have spoken very eloquently, and I'd love to talk more about how, instead of comparing ourselves to other people, to establish what our norm is, and then recognizing the deviation from that norm, so that we can then adjust accordingly.
Yeah, so I love the wellness space and women's wellness, and I also want to say that one of the challenges that we see is, like, if you just have the perfect period, if you have your menstrual cycle, if your period comes every 28 days, if you never have a cramp, if you never have a bad mood, that's like somehow this illusion, and it's not quite that simple. But there is a range of normal, so that we know, like, if you have your period basically every 26 to 32 days, that's normal. It doesn't have to be 28 days. The average period around the world is not 28 days. If you have a cramp now and then, it doesn't mean like you're full of inflammation, your diet's a mess. That's normal too. What we shouldn't be experiencing is periods that are just all over irregular. They're shorter than 26 days, they're longer than 32 days. Every month there's like a complete variation. So if month to month, maybe it's like 4 days different, that's fine. But if 1 month it's 24 days, 1 month it's 37 days, 1 month it's 42 days, that's not normal. Your period may cause you a little bit of, sensation of fullness in your pelvis. You may feel a little achy, but it shouldn't make you doubled over in pain. It shouldn't make you have to take ibuprofen every month, quite frankly. And how much bleeding is normal? Well, you shouldn't be blowing through pads and tampons every period. Like, up to 6 changes a day is considered normal, but more than that, well, that's a heavy period. So we know that there's this blueprint that has guided women from time immemorial, and we know what normal is in terms of like normal, healthy. But we've been convinced that what's common is normal. So it's very common for women to have horribly painful periods. It's very common for women to have really irregular cycles or all the struggles. But we're told, oh, that's normal because you're a woman. That's normal because you have a uterus. But it's actually not. Like, this idea that being normal means suffering, miserable, or even hormonal, like out of control, it's just totally not true.
Yeah, and I am so glad you said that, because many people, I think many doctors and many people have experienced that when they go to a gynecologist or a doctor, that it becomes very, oh, I've got pain. It's like, oh, that's normal. And so we don't even say, should I be changing this? Is there something I can do? And then make connections with, why am I depressed? Why am I not feeling good about myself? And that's where I really would love to lead. So like why is it important, in fact, that we normalize our periods in order to have emotional stability?
Well, first of all, if we're struggling with something, that's hard enough. And then if we're struggling with something and we think it's our fault, there's something wrong with us, or we're just too embarrassed to talk about heavy bleeding or vaginal odor or irregular periods or pain or whatever it is, we're putting ourselves at risk, because sometimes these things are actually indications that there is something else going on. And the longer you put off taking care of that something else, the more risk you have with that. So let's just look at endometriosis, right? Period pain can be a sign of endometriosis. We know it takes women 9 years on average, multiple different doctors, to get a diagnosis.
Whoa!
The
Hang on a minute, sorry.
Is that
9
insane?
years?
Yeah, I know, yes, 9.3 years on average, and as many as 5 or 7 doctors. And so you go to one doctor and you're like, my period is killing me, having sex is painful, I'm constipated, I'm miserable. And they're like, well, that's normal, take some ibuprofen and we'll put you on the pill. Then you go to the next doctor, they're telling you the same thing. You go to the next doctor, and the other thing is, the more doctors you go to, the more each doctor is likely to think it's in your head. So now you're not just getting recommended the pill and the ibuprofen, but you're told to take the Prozac or whatever it is. And not that those things are wrong. Like, if you need those things, that's totally fine. But we're not looking under the hood. But here's the thing. All these different conditions have implications, right? So with endometriosis, it's actually causing scarring in the pelvis and the abdomen. And so it can cause your bladder to get adhered to your intestines, to your uterus. It can make it really hard to have a bowel movement. It can make it really difficult to urinate. It can make it really painful to have sex. It can affect your fertility. So we're doing ourselves a disservice by not pushing for information that we deserve to have. And that's why there's this concept now that actually got first circulated around 2007 by a medical organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics. And then in 2013, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists repeated what they said, which is that women's menstrual cycles are our 6th vital sign. So we have our blood pressure, our pulse, our temperature, our respiratory rate. Pain is considered the 5th one, and women's menstrual cycles are the 6th, meaning that they're telling us something. They're giving us information. Just like you would take your temperature if you didn't feel well, we need to know what's going on with our menstrual cycles. But here's the thing. Even though 2 major medical organizations, like 2 of the biggest ones in the US, said that, do doctors know it? No, like nobody's being taught that. So then it becomes really important for women to understand this information for ourselves. I call it me search, like doing our own me search, getting in touch with what's happening with your cycle, how do you feel? And it can be really cool because there are some crazy things. Like we know that we are more likely to go on a shopping binge when we are premenstrual than when we're in the middle of our cycle. So maybe, you know, like people say, don't order food or don't go shopping on an empty stomach. Like don't go crazy with your credit card right before your period. We also know that when we're ovulating, when we're fertile, we're more likely to go home with the good-looking guy who's got a little bit of the bad boy vibe, or maybe the good-looking woman who's got a little bit of the bad boy vibe, bad girl vibe. But we're not necessarily making the best assessment. We're kind of thinking with our ovaries and our fertility. So learning some of these things is actually really fun.
Oh my God, like seriously, I'm like, please keep telling me more, because that's the thing, is that I am just, if I had to have my favorite quote ever tattooed, it would be with no judgment. Because everything that you're talking about, if you feel like you're drawn towards the bad boy or the bad girl a couple of days before you're ovulating or whatever, like, okay, no judgment. Now at least I know, so that I can prepare for certain things that may come my way. What other ones?
Exactly.
So what other ones can you actually give us?
Yeah, so for example, we know that when we're entering that time of our cycle, when we're fertile, so when we're around ovulation, our energy is actually more pumped up. So we're more likely to stick with an exercise program that we start, and our pain threshold is lower. We actually need to eat a little bit less for the most part, and we're more inclined to eat lighter food right after our period all the way through ovulation. So if you do want to do that little mini detox, or you do want to start that new eating plan and that new exercise program, you're more likely to get going on it and be successful with it. Same with a new business plan or applying for that job. You're more likely to feel confident. And it's really interesting because there are physical changes and emotional changes that happen that support that. We also, this is very weird, but as part of that whole biological like push for nature to want us to reproduce, we actually look more physically attractive to others, but also to ourselves around ovulation. So if you're feeling lack of confidence about anything, which I hope you won't, no matter what part of your cycle you're in, but if you need that extra little like boost of confidence to feel good when you look in the mirror, to go and do that, new thing you want to do, go out on that date, go out on, to that club, or go do that job interview, it's a great time. Also, premenstrually, our pain threshold goes up and our exercise tolerance goes down. So it's a time to think about maybe doing some yoga or Pilates or a gentle dance class rather than like hitting up the CrossFit, especially if you've never done it before. We do tend to want to eat a little more carbs and sugar, and there's a reason for that right before our period. It helps our brains produce something called serotonin, which makes us less depressed. But if you're restricting your carbs, you might feel more PMS-y before your period. Or if you're not aware that it's natural to want to eat more carbs and sugar, you're more likely to go for the donuts or the muffin rather than being prepared for it and be like, oh, I'm going to make a really phenomenal rice pudding or chia pudding or something that's still really chocolate. Like dark chocolate is great. You know, it's great for your mood. It's great for your energy. It actually has magnesium, which helps your periods be a little more comfortable. So being prepared for that craving with the good food, you know, or the good treats, the healthier ones, is great. So there are all these little hacks that we can do to be more kind of in tune with our cycle and also more, I want to say in control, because I don't really feel like controlling is the best word, but more aligned with what our bodies are trying to do. And the way to get there is just start paying attention, like just start noticing what's going on, and even like keep a little like period calendar or like a menstrual cycle calendar throughout the month.
That's literally what I was going to say, is like it would be so powerful to keep a list of all the things you want to do in life, your achievements. I want to ask, you know, I want to run a marathon. I want to do this. I want to ask for that promotion. I want to take that challenge, and then put it in your calendar based on when you're hormonally best to do so. Totally.
And it's not like it's not like we're not as capable at any time in our cycle. In fact, studies have shown like you can take a math PhD final whatever exam and do just as well right before your periods. Right. I don't want to imply that we can run that, you know, we saw Kiran Gandhi run that marathon in her knickers with her like no pad on, right? Free bleeding. You can do it anytime, but you can, it's like going sailing. If you're going to go on a sailboat, you're going to get better sailing when the wind is with you, right? And it's like being in that kind of natural flow of our cycle and playing to our personal best. It's just kind of some cool, fun stuff. You know, and also just like I was saying, it's good stuff to pay attention to so that we're not just pushed into our impulses. Like, I feel like going on a shopping spree at Net-a-Porter today. Oh, wait, I'm 2 days before my period. Let me just wait on that impulse and see if I really want that in 1 week. Or, I mean, I'm really attracted to this person and I really do kind of want to go home with them, but let me check in. Okay, ovulating here. Am I actually really attracted to them, or is this just like my hormones talking?
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that so much, because like you said, it's not that you can't, but if you can hedge your bets, it's like, why not do so? And that's what I'm always about. It's like, what tools and tricks can I use in certain situations to give me extra confidence, right? It's like there are going to be certain things I don't have the confidence in, but if I can plan it to be around that, in just thinking about, if you do it next Tuesday, Lisa, you're actually going to be more confident. So now what am I doing? I'm actually telling myself, Lisa, next Tuesday, you're going to be more confident. So it becomes the real effect plus the placebo effect almost coming together to give you the outcome that you're looking for.
And we all kind of know it, right? Like, I mean, how many of us really feel like going out to a club or a social gathering right before our period? I mean, we're more likely to want to put on our comfy clothes and watch a movie on Netflix. But if you start to pay attention to the middle of your cycle, you might go, wow, I'm just suddenly feeling like getting out. And it really, when we start to pay attention to these subtle cues, they really start to align. And here's the thing, if you're not getting those, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you either. But it can mean that your hormones aren't kind of dialing in at the level that we might hope they would be. And so those little signs, it doesn't have to just be pain or acne or PMS. It can actually be these more subtle things. I'm actually not noticing that I'm having that little bump in my sex drive mid-cycle, or I'm not having these shifts and changes, and that can be important too.
Yeah, 100%. And I actually want to go back to something you said about chocolate. So I love it, and I've heard you say this before, but it's like, look, a little bit of dark chocolate can actually be great. But here's the thing, I'm sure people hear that and they're like, oh my God, well, Dr. Aviva said I can go get a Snickers bar. And before you know it, they're eating Snickers, they're eating ice cream. And as a result, I think it becomes even worse, right? Because if you have too much sugar, that absolutely can affect your hormones and brain fog and your energy. So I do think there is that fine line of hearing what you're saying and then people taking it to a different level. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is the one thing that I'd heard so often growing up, and it never felt right until I started really digging into the health space. But a lot of the women that I knew growing up, as soon as they would get pregnant, the first thing they would say is, this means I can eat whatever I like. And I used to be like, is that like, Really? Like, is it the fat and the calorie? Like, is it the calories, or really isn't it the quality of food? And I think that's really important to pinpoint here on what you're saying. Is there's certain things, but it is the quality of it. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
So, there are some phenomenal studies about the benefits of dark chocolate, but it is really important to keep it to a couple of ounces a day. And we know that can help reduce depression. It can help your weight stay healthier, actually, because you have that to look forward to. So if you have the dark chocolate instead of the Snickers bar or the croissant or the muffin or the ice cream bowl, whatever it is, then that's a few ounces that you can look forward to. We know it helps with blood pressure, cognitive functions. There are a lot of really important benefits. But that's what I always tell my patients. Look, if you're somebody who can't have just one and stop, whatever it is, don't do it. I personally, I don't love 92% dark chocolate. It's so dark. I'm just like, it's not enjoyable to me. So I usually say 72% or above, but you're right, it does have a little bit of sugar. So keeping it reined in, keeping it to a few ounces, not going crazy on it. And if you enjoy that, I think that's wonderful, because we know that when we restrict too much, we actually tend to rebound in the other direction and overdo it. But there are people who just can't have one, right? They if that one just triggers that craving, and they all of a sudden it's okay, yeah, that was good, but I'm gonna eat the whole bar and I'm gonna get another one. If that's you, just kind of stay away from it. As far as eating for two, that is a complete myth. And what we eat when we're pregnant is actually really important, because we can set the tone for our child's health lifelong. You don't have to be a monk about your diet, but keeping it to a really healthful, plenty of fish, or if you're vegan, making sure that you're getting good quality protein, lots of fruits and vegetables, and keeping sugar pretty much out of the diet is absolutely optimal. It causes all kinds of inflammation. It can lead to gestational diabetes, other problems. But if you do have to have sugar, have something healthful, have something that's made with dates. There are wonderful recipes you can do with dates. Keep it to maple syrup or honey or natural sugar, and keep it to a minimum amount. And just, if you're going to do anything, stay away from processed food, bad quality oils, and soft drinks. Sodas of any kind are probably one of the worst.
I love all the tips. You're so tactical, which is so useful, because there's so many things that people feel, right? I don't feel good because of my period. I feel bloated, but a lot of us almost feel powerless. And in case some people don't know who is watching this, I actually haven't had a period in over 10 years. I have had massive gut issues. So that's actually why I wanted to also talk about food.
Wow. Yeah.
On the amount of doctors that told me my gut, my period weren't related. I was like, that doesn't seem to feel right to me. Isn't everything connected? And they're like, no, you're fine. Then eventually I went to a gynecologist. I started to take control, ownership over what was happening to my body. I was stopped listening to doctors. It turned out I'd overdosed, quote unquote, on antibiotics for just too many years, and my whole gut lining was destroyed. But it had such an impact on how I felt as a woman, how unsexy I felt, how depressed I was, really slipping into, my self-esteem, all of this. So talk to me about the connection between the mind and the gut and food, now that we're talking about chocolate and things like that, because I don't think people pay enough attention to it and actually take it seriously.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people who especially are seen as health or wellness celebrities, it can be very easy for people who are watching to think, oh, well, she must have it all figured out and must be in perfect health. And so I think as people share their stories, that's part of what normalizes it. As you said before, how do we normalize it? And it's talking about it and being honest about it. There's a huge connection between gut and hormones, first of all, and a huge connection between gut and mind and hormones. So think of it as a triangle, and it just going around and around. So first of all, we know that at least half of all women who have period problems, half of all women who have endometriosis have either irritable bowel syndrome that's been diagnosed, or have symptoms of it: bloating, loose poops, constipation, gas, all that stuff that just makes your gut feel miserable. And most women notice that is worse before their period. If, a lot of women just get really constipated or really get loose poops before their period, or they get a lot of gas and bloating. Some of that bloating is water retention due to hormones, but some of it's what's going on in the gut. So our microbiome especially is very involved in how we process and eliminate our hormones. And so if your microbiome is disrupted, it can really have an impact on your hormones, especially your estrogen. We have this whole branch of our microbiome literally just dedicated, its genetic job is just to process estrogen. So just so you know, that's how significant the connection is.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's called the estrobolome, and that's all it's supposed to do. So we also know, I mean, everyone has experienced some kind of like butterflies in their stomach, or you have to go take your final exam and you run to the bathroom 5 times. So we know there's a huge connection between stress and our gut. And so some of the changes that happen with stress, we mentioned antibiotics, but also diet. So our ancestors in like Paleolithic times, so paleo people, they got 100 grams of fiber every day from their diet, from plants and that they were eating, vegetables, berries, etc. The guidelines on how much fiber we need just to prevent colon cancer is 30 grams a day. The average American is getting 15 grams a day. 15. So like, an eighth of what our ancestors got and half of what we need even to prevent colon cancer. And my guess is that if you looked at the UK, most of Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, we'd see the same, a lot of South America, we'd see the same kind of data. We're just not getting the kind of fiber we need. That has a huge impact on our hormones too. So it kind of goes around and round. But we also know that there's a huge gut impact. So significant that 2 major studies showed that when women with anxiety were given a probiotic containing food twice a day, their anxiety resolved in 6 to 8 weeks. So it's really, you can do a huge amount. And even if trauma or social circumstances are causing you stress and anxiety, it's like you were saying before, what can we do to at least, hedge our bets and say, okay, even if a small amount of this is contributed to by my microbiome, let me take care of that also, while I'm also helping myself with these other aspects of my life. So I'm huge on making sure that our gut is healthy, eating fiber, lots of fruits and vegetables, all the things we talked about, like sugar feeds the microbiome. Processed food, it feeds an unhealthy microbiome. Processed food feeds an unhealthy microbiome. And we know that you can turn your microbiome around in just a couple of weeks of increasing your fruits and vegetables, increasing your healthy fats, getting enough fiber. It's not rocket science. It's just, it sounds complicated because we've never been taught this stuff. And it can really help your mood. And we know, like, I'm sure you've experienced too, like when you eat a healthier diet, when you're getting good protein in your diet every day, when you're getting plenty of fruits and vegetables, we feel better. Like our mood is better, our energy's better, we're not as tired, we don't feel, inflamed and irritable. So, it's a win-win all across the board.
Yeah, I love that you said all that, because when I went through my massive gut issue, and I'm still struggling, it's been like 5-6 years now, massive improvement. I went almost a year where I could barely eat. My hair was falling out. My nails were brittle. It was really bad. I had SIBO, leaky gut, parasite. And all of this was discovered because I stepped in. The doctors were just trying to give me a pill. It literally was, oh, you've got SIBO, take an antibiotic. And it was like, and I didn't know any better. And that's the thing. So like, everything you're saying is just educating us so that we know better, so that when we do things, we just do it with our eyes open. And the very first year where I had the gut issues, I've never been so depressed. I'm not a crier, doctor. I'm really not, but I would just burst into tears. And I was people think of me as very confident. I had crippling anxiety from having zero confidence. And so to not say that it wasn't the gut, to, ignore the hormones was a disservice to me. And so once I started to realize, okay, what can I do to adjust my hormones, adjust the way that I'm, what I'm eating, how much I'm sleeping, all of these things started to help me rebuild my gut so that I could then eat all the foods and stuff that you're saying and then start feeling better about it. But we're not
told.
It's
a process. Like, like you said, right? It's like you said you've been doing this for 5 years, and I think that's another thing that's really important. And I really appreciate you acknowledging that. Is that sometimes women will hear about a detox, or they'll hear about a cleanse, or they'll hear about the latest diet. And you know, when we write books, our publishers, they want us to pick out the best case and say, you can do this. At some point, I think it was in like the 90s or early 2000s, it became this thing, like the 7-day diet, the 14-day diet. And in publishing, everything became that. You know, the 7-day gut fix, the 2 weeks to fix your hormones. But it's a process. And I want, you know, like we're talking about feeling confident and feeling successful. It's so important to know that, because if you buy a book and it says, you can fix this in 2 weeks, and 2 weeks later, you're still feeling crappy and you're doing all the right things that it says, then there can be a sense of like you're failing. Or even sometimes you can be made to feel that way by certain practitioners, like, well, you're just not doing the diet enough. You're not meditating enough. But it actually is a process that can take a really long time. It can take years. And the thing that is important is that to remember along the way is like all the changes that you're making are so important for your long-term health, not just feeling better now, but the later on stuff, the stuff when we're in our 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, our cognitive health, our brain health, our bone health. And so it may not be an overnight fix, but having faith in the process is actually really important when you do get onto that healthful plan. It can make such a difference over time.
Yes, I'm so glad that you said that about like the 7-day quick fix and things, because I definitely thought, I was like, my gut's in disarray, I can't really eat much, I'll be fine in a couple of weeks, it's a stomach bug. Couple of weeks went by, right? Then you go to a doctor, the doctor's like, oh, take this pill. So then I kept thinking 100%, right? It's me. What am I doing wrong? And when your hormones are already in disarray, you don't feel good about yourself from the get-go. So now I'm actually just feeding the negative story that I'm telling myself about how bad I am. But once I just flipped it, literally, it was like I went to so many doctors. I thought, oh, all the best doctors in Beverly Hills are gonna, fix me. And so I stopped saying, what's the quick fix? And I just said, it's a lifestyle change. And the second I said it's a lifestyle change, I started to break down one thing at a time and say, okay, how can I help here? How can I help my sleep better? And I started to notice over time that I started to get my confidence back. I started to feel better about myself. I started to feel more like a sexual woman again. And that really hurts. I've been married for 19 years. And so it was very important. Sex to me is very important. Connection with my husband is very important. But I didn't feel like it. Like that was the last thing I wanted. And so once you start building that back, it has such a knock-on effect. Now, I really want to take us into the sexual desire and how we can use our hormones to our advantage and what we can do to, raise our libido and things like that.
Yeah. So back to what we were talking about earlier about understanding our cycles. That's a great place to start. So many of us have different, libido is so different for every woman, and what our expectations are, what we want our sexual relationship to be. So I want to honor, different people want different things. But if you want that juicy sexual relationship, one thing is to start to pay attention to, well, when is my libido stimulated? When do I feel like doing it? Do I feel like being close, intimate? When do I feel most sexual? And when do I feel most sexy? Because that's a lot of it, right? If you're not feeling sexy, you're not going to be feeling sexual. So start to pay attention to what turns you on, when, what time of the month. Is it that you are around ovulation? Is it maybe you're closer to your period? For some women, that increased pelvic pressure makes them feel much more horny and just wanting to have that pelvic release, right? It's a physical sensation. Is it, especially if you've been in a longer term relationship, is it when your partner reaches out to you and gets things going, then you're responsive? Whereas if you had to get things going, maybe not so much. And that's really common for women, particularly when you have kids, you're giving all day long, you've got your career, you're giving all day long. At the end of the day, you're like, really, do I really want to get that going now? But you want to be sexual. And so talking to your partner, if you're in a relationship where you can, have that conversation, hopefully if you're in a relationship, you can have that conversation, say, look, I really want to be in this very fluid sexual relationship with you, but a lot of times these days I'm just not feeling like getting things going. But if you get things going, and then you start to pay attention to, well, which things? Like for some women, it is a sensual back rubs. For some women, it's like your partner taking out the trash because you don't have to think about it now and doing the dinner dishes. And you're like, ooh, like that. For some women, it's getting a gift. It may be like just somebody brings you home some chocolates or flowers or whatnot. So if you're finding that you're able to respond, and what does response mean? You're feeling turned on and your body is responding. Maybe you feel some sensation in your breast that's activated. Maybe you have more lubrication. That's all telling you that your body is responsive. Also, most challenges with libido don't actually have to do with hormones. They do have to do with relationship and life circumstances. So if you have little kids and you're exhausted, getting a babysitter and getting out and getting a hotel room for the night, whatever you need to do to like break it up and change it up can really make a difference. Because the kids go to bed and then you're starting to get going and then, Mom, I need some water. It's like, it's a buzzkill. So thinking about what is getting in the way. We know that for people in their 20s right now, the use of electronic devices in the bedroom is one of the biggest buzzkills for sex. In fact, 20-year-olds, people in their 20s are having less sex than any of the last few generations.
Whoa,
every study showing.
Really?
Yep, because I'm gonna just go and flip through my Instagram or like text this person. So it's really getting in the way of people having that intimacy. But if you're not having any response physiologically, like you're just not getting turned on, if things feel pretty flatlined for you and you're noticing it and it's bothering you, then it could be your hormones. So it can be low estrogen, low testosterone, low progesterone. It can be anxiety or depression that's getting in the way. It can also be, in that case, then doing things like supporting ovulation if you're not ovulating, making sure that you're getting really good healthy fats in your diet, avocado, fish oil, olive oil. These are all great healthy fats that support building your hormones. Making sure that you're addressing stress because the hormone cortisol can block your sex drive. Make sure your thyroid function is normal. You can actually ask your primary provider, your doctor, your nurse midwife, your nurse practitioner to run a thyroid panel because low thyroid function is an absolute, will absolutely block your libido, and it's really common. So there are things that you can do to just check in. I love this class of herbs called adaptogens. A lot of people have heard of them now. Ashwagandha, rhodiola, holy basil. And the reason I love those when sex drive is low is because they help to balance your stress hormones. They help to reduce anxiety. They help to support your sex hormones. And they have a little bit of, they're not like sexual stimulators, but in doing all of that, they can help really support libido as well. So you can take those every day. And it's not like the more you take, the more libido gets stimulated. Yeah. I mean, there are herbs and supplements that can help with libido, but I don't really feel like that's usually the safest way to go. They tend to be more stimulating and not really getting to the root cause of what's going on. And a lot of what's going on is, either we're at a moment in our life, we've got little kids, or we're going through menopause and we're just not feeling it. But it's a lot of times it's we're tired and we're overwhelmed, or we're just not getting the juice back. We're not like having the person who's really taking the time to make it romantic. And for women, it's really different than for men. Like for men, it's very physical. I mean, they can get erections all day long by just thinking about sex or seeing something that turns them on. For women, we know it's about relationship. It doesn't mean you can't, see someone who's hot and feel really drawn to them and feel really aroused. But in general, for an ongoing, healthy sexual relationship and good libido, it really is about that connection that we tend to want to get things going. And chocolate.
Go ahead, chocolate.
Spicy foods, scary movies. It's weird. There are some things that get your adrenaline going. So if you're really looking for a hot date. Really? Isn't that funny?
So if you're looking for a hot date, you should watch a horror movie while drinking
chocolate.
Eat chili chocolate while drinking ashwagandha tea.
Totally.
That's amazing.
Oh, what you were saying that reminded me of something before, because we've talked a lot about self-esteem, and body image plays such a huge role in sexual stimulation and sexual arousal, because you can feel really attracted to someone, but if you're feeling really bad about your own body or your own self, you can almost kind of squash your own libido. Like, yeah, I really want to, but they're not gonna like, and it can be about it can be about your husband that you've been with for 20 years or your wife that you've been with for 20 years. You're at a different phase in life. Maybe you've had a few children. Maybe you're in perimenopause. Maybe your boobs aren't like, as high up on your chest as they used to be, or maybe you've put on some pounds, or you're just feeling unconfident, and that has such a huge, huge role. And I want us to be able to embrace ourselves however we are and know how beautiful and sexy we are when we feel that way. And I think part of, hearkening back to what we were talking about in the very beginning of like not having the conversation about things that are embarrassing about our periods, we are not taught to explore ourselves and our own sexual pleasure. And we're definitely not taught to talk about what we like with our partners. So sometimes things just get stale, or maybe your body has gone through changes and things that you used to like, you don't love as much anymore. Maybe, when you were 18 and 20, anything would get you turned on, but now you're like 40 and it's just not the same. You're in a different place in your life. But being able to explore what we love, find our own pleasure, and then be able to communicate that to a partner or partners, however you roll, that can be a game changer for your sexuality. And one thing that's been really interesting with COVID is that the sexual pleasure and sexual toy market has exploded because so many people are home alone. But it's something that if you're having trouble finding pleasure with someone else, but you can find it with yourself, that's really important, because one, that may say something about what's going on in your relationship, and it may not mean that relationship is doomed. It may mean that you need to have a conversation of like what does and doesn't please you. And it may be that your partner just doesn't know, and they're not educated. So when you find what you love, you can show them, and then they can be more attentive to your needs.
I love that. I would be very remiss if I didn't bring up the subject of birth control, because I think, when you think about what is there, 7.5 billion people in the world, and if you consider half those people have periods, and then how many of those people are put on birth control is just absolutely insane. And the things we're not told, or the things we're told about the contraception or the pill is, and then we find out 20 years later that actually we're wrong. Now, of course, there's no blame. It's just, it is what it is. But you actually did a post recently that I was fascinated by, with the things that we wish we knew about birth control before we started taking it. So can you break down a couple of those for me, so that we can really understand what we're doing? Because I literally was told, oh, this will help regulate you, this will help, this will, and then over time I found out that it was creating a lot of estrogen in my gut, which was part of one of my gut issues. And I was like, what do you mean the pill has to do with my gut? And in hindsight, I wish I'd known. So if you can break down a couple of those, that would be awesome.
Yeah, one of the things I hear more often than any other statement is, I wish I knew that when. So I've started this campaign asking women different questions, like what I wish I knew about my first period, what I wish I knew about this, what I wish I knew about that, what I wish I knew about birth control was one recently. And it was astonishing how many women responded with, I wish I knew that it could cause blood clots before I had a blood clot. I wish I knew it could cause severe depression before I ended up with years of serious depression and one medication after another. I wish I knew it could cause me weight gain. I wish I knew, on and on and on, the list went on. And the reality is, as I said earlier, I'm not opposed to people using birth control if that's what they want to use for contraception, or if that's what they need to have a more healthful, comfortable experience of being in their body. But what I am opposed to is women not being told about the very real risks. And the risks of depression are real, and they're significant. The risks of blood clots, it's rare, but it's not so rare that women shouldn't know about it. And here's the thing, 60% of all women on birth control are not on it for birth control. We're on it, as you said, to regulate our hormones, for pain, for things that may be helped by it, but that there are other things along the way that we can try before we start the birth control that can be effective. And how many women get put on it when they're like 15 and don't even think of coming off of it until they're, say, 35 and ready to have a first baby? So they've been on it for 20 years and it's just been suppressing their normal hormones the whole time. So whatever they went on it for is still there when they come off of it. And so now they're right back into their symptoms. So I'm just such a huge proponent. If you need to be on it for contraception, know your risks, consider alternatives like natural family planning and condoms or diaphragm, or even an IUD, in my opinion, is generally less impactful on our health. The hormonal IUD does have some hormones in it. There's a copper kind that doesn't, but even still the hormones in that are so much less than any of the other methods. And then if you have a gynecologic or hormone imbalance, try some other things first. Try stress reduction, try changing your diet, try addressing your microbiome. I mean, that's why I wrote Hormone Intelligence. I wanted women to have the information that they could trust that fills the gap of what, and I'm saying this as a Yale-trained MD, we never hear about in medical school, but is just as valid and usually safer. And that's the thing. It's like, if you can do something that's mild and safe and get lifelong benefits rather than do something that is just suppressive and has risks, why not try the other thing first?
God, yeah. And your platform, everything you say, your book was amazing. Like, everything you do is really just talking about the realities. And it's like, look, to me, knowledge is power. Knowing more can only help me then dictate how I'm going to live my life. And if I decide, cool, I know all these side effects are very possible, but I still decide to take it, amazing. At least you're doing it with your eyes open. And that's the biggest thing, is that I didn't know. When I went on the pill at the age of 16, 100%, it was like, oh, this is the magic pill. It will solve everything. And then before I knew it, it was like all these other health conditions were coming. And not one doctor told me, oh, hang on, are you on the pill? It wasn't until I had a microbiome assessment analysis that the doctor came back and was like, you eat a lot of soy? And I was like, I don't eat any soy. And they're like, there's a really high level of estrogen in your gut. And then she was like, are you on the pill? I was like, yes. She's like, stop that immediately. And I had no idea. So if I had an idea, at least, again, going back to like almost then, like, allow me to make the decision of what I'm doing to my body. And if I decide it's worth it, then I have the power to do so. But I never want to find myself in a situation.
And you know that you need to like check in once in a while, not just go on the pill and say, all right, well, now I'm on this for 15 years, but like every year, every couple of years, check in. Do I still need this? Has that problem been addressed? And I'm now just taking something I don't need anymore, unless of course it's for birth control. But it's real. Like, there was a study done in Denmark a few years back, and just the rates of depression in teenage girls and young women who started the pill had never had depression before, and depression's severe enough for them to go and get treated with an antidepressant. But nobody ever said, oh, is it the pill? Like, maybe we need to think about another option, or even just another dose or another form for you, and not just, treat you like you're somebody with a mental health problem when, look, if you have a mental health problem, all respect, we need to really be open and talking about it, but we're creating mental health problems. And then somebody believes that they have a mental health problem that they don't even have at all. And that can affect their self-esteem too, right? To struggle with depression and anxiety, it can affect their life when it's a pharmaceutical that they were put on that's causing it. That to me is just, it really blows my mind.
God, yeah, and now it really has come full circle in this discussion, because where we started is, why are girls having periods so young? And that goes to my point of, if girls are now if we are now starting to have our periods way younger, and we're starting to have the problems and issues, and we go on contraception younger, right? Because a big thing is, the pill will help regulate you. So now you've got
someone just told me in the social post the other day that their daughter was recommended to go on the pill at 11. For her hormones.
Okay, that is exactly the point. So now think the girl's going on the I didn't even get my period at 11. I got my period at like 15. But so now you've got girls that are getting their period early. Doctors have recommended that they go on contraception to help regulate it's the pain. And now you get girls at 12, 13 that are suffering from depression, and we have no clue why. Like, this is like really got me lit on fire, girl, because that's the point of that. We're starting earlier, we're doing this to our body earlier, and now we're finding our problems happening even earlier, and we're pretty much living longer. So now it's like your problems are starting earlier, and if we don't fix them or we don't alter our behavior, then we have a longer time to be really struggling with these problems.
And also a longer time of being exposed to estrogen. And so we know that the longer you're exposed to estrogen, the more your risk of cancers goes up. And, you know, when we go back to that idea that our cycle is a vital sign, like, imagine if you took a medication that made your temperature stay the same all the time. So you never knew when you had a fever. You could never tell if you had an infection. And essentially that's what we're doing. We're saying, okay, you're 11, you're 12, you're 13, you're 14. We're going to put you on this medication that is going to blunt all your normal signals. So now you can't read that vital sign anymore. And that is really frightening to me. And also it takes away an opportunity for us to use our cycles the way we talked about in all those beautiful, powerful ways. It just takes away an opportunity for us to be who we are with that fluid changes across our cycles. I feel sad for that. Again, no judgment. For me, it's all about what works for you, and if, you know, whatever you need, as long as you know what you're getting into.
If you want to know what the top foods as us women must eat to boost our energy, lose weight, and look and feel freaking younger, then click here right now.
And what I found is that the vast majority of the population has a glucose issue, but most of us don't know it, right? And so